Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third Pride in Nature event, which is hosted by Natural England. We, it's really great. There's over 100 people have joined us today, and I suspect the numbers are just going to keep going up over the next couple of minutes. We've got colleagues online, we've got stakeholders, we've got members of the public. I'm Naomi Stevenson, and I'll be the host for the event, which has been set up by staff in the Pride at Natural England network, which is Natural England's LGBTQ plus network with over 150 members. I'd like to start just by giving you a little bit of information about the day. The theme for this year is Representation Matters, and we'll be hearing from a diverse range of speakers. I think we have a slide at the beginning there with folks' names on. We do. You can see it there. So you'll see the schedule for the morning. If you want a handy copy for that, copy of that, just do a screen grab so you've got it in front of you. Blah, 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 blah. The speakers, starting off with Sean Gornall, whose pronouns are he and him. He's Natural England's Director of Assurance and Corporate Governance. We'll be hearing from Ben Andrews, an organic farmer based in Herefordshire. Ben's pronouns are he and him. And I have to say that I've seen a sneak preview of the slides, and one of them made me so extremely happy, and I'll tell you why um, later on. We'll be hearing from Nina Seal, pronouns she and they. Nina is a writer, a conservationist, a cabaret performer, and a trustee. We'll be hearing from Lily K. Bright, who is a writer, a facilitator, and a textile artist, and is obsessed with city nature. Lily, I'd love to have a chat with you about some of those things sometime. We'll be hearing from Joe Friend, the director and founder of Pepper Studio, an award-winning social agency, and from Ben Hunt, who's Vice News's global correspondent for LGBTQ plus investigations. And finally, last but by no means least, James Diamond, who's senior champion and ally of Pride at Natural England, who will be closing the event. You'll see you can enable live captions for part of this. If you go to the top of the screen to your menu, there's a little three buttons that says more. Um, click on that. That gives you some accessibility, and you should then be able to enable live captions running across the bottom of your screen. Not expecting any technical problems, but if we do have any, please just pop them into the Q&A function for the team to review. We'll be using Mentimeter, if we can have that on slide on screen, please, to collect your thoughts on the event. James will be telling you more about that later. But just returning to our theme, community continues to face discrimination, particularly the trans community. We're looking to achieve true diversity of thought and greater understanding. And for that, we need true representation. And we need to be thinking about representation versus tokenism, because there is still tokenism. One brilliant thing is that representation leads to greater awareness and empowerment of the LGBT plus community, which is what we're celebrating today. We could pop the principles slide on screen, please. Okie dokes. I would just like to take a moment just to talk you through that one. We know that people have different views. Wherever there are more than one person, there's going to be more than one view. And whilst we don't agree with each other, we always treat each other with respect. All the speakers today have agreed to these principles, and we're going to ask, as attendees, you do the same. Think about the questions you want to ask, and think about how you can encourage healthy debate. Most importantly of all, think about how you want to be treated yourself. This event is a celebration of the community and conversations on representation, why it's important for us all. And it's going to be really, really good. I'm about to pass the mic to Sean Gornall. But before I do just want to note that we got 2 comfort breaks built into the schedule, one at 10 past 10 and the other at 20 past 11. And on that note, Sean, I'm going to hand over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm really delighted that Natural England is able to host this event for so many people, and it's great to see so many people joining us. So thank you all for taking the time to spend some time with us this morning talking about this really important topic. I'll introduce myself. I'm Sean, and I'm a director at Natural England. And we've checked a little bit in with colleagues, and we believe that I'm the most senior member of staff who is out as a member of the LGBT community within Natural England. And like I said, I'm delighted that we're hosting this. And I just found out before going live that today is the spring equinox, which is like nature's version, if you like, of an equality day where daylight and nighttime are perfectly divided across the globe. So that's a wonderful day to be able to speak with you all. I live in Bristol with my husband and my son, and I wanted to share a little bit about 3 things where representation really matters and some of the intersectionality of those things. So I'm a gay man. I was brought up in a working class environment, and until 18 months ago, I'd never worked in the environment sector. And those are all areas I want to touch on a little bit in my introduction before handing over to colleagues. So the Great Outdoors is a wonderful place. I'm really lucky. My husband and I have enjoyed traveling all around the world, visiting lots of different places, and we've really enjoyed spending time outdoors and in the natural environment. Lots of camping, lots of camper vans out in nature and seeing some fantastic sights. I think so far the best ever was going to sleep in the Grand Canyon, seeing the Milky Way for the first time in my life, and then waking up the very first morning and watching sunrise over the Grand Canyon. So it's wonderful that I can access those places. Now, contrasting that to where I live at home, just up the road, I can take the dog to the crest of this wonderful hill and just sit out and look across the fields and the rivers, and it's wonderful to be able to do that. But as wonderful as it is, we must recognise that many people from LGBT backgrounds might view nature and rural environments as intimidating, which is why representation is really important. Many of us will have grown up and possibly come out in small towns and in the countryside, and it can sometimes be easy to conflate those really difficult experiences with the environments in which we grew up in, and those rural environments can sometimes make us feel things that we haven't felt for a really long time and can make us feel a bit more outside than we objectively might need to feel. Another factor that's really important that I wanted to address is the ability to pass or code switching. Enjoying the natural environment often means being able to enjoy a lot of privilege. So I want to sort of contrast some of my experiences. When I was growing up as a working class boy, we didn't have a car. Neither of my parents could drive until one of them learned to drive when I was 18. So spending time in nature was very much my dad dragging me and my 2 sisters outdoors and to a nearest bit of field that my dad can remember from when he was a child. We would be wearing probably the trainers that we would wear to go to school, and probably jeans, and we probably weren't dressed. In fact, we almost certainly weren't dressed for hiking. This was back in the days when kids didn't drink water all the time, so we definitely wouldn't have had any water with us or anything to drink, and we certainly wouldn't have had a little packed lunch. And we would have just been taken on my dad's sort of mystery tour of nature, which was wonderful. But when I contrast that to Saturday just gone, I was able to get in a car, wearing hiking boots and walking trousers and a gilet, and my husband had the rucksack with a thermos of tea and sandwiches. And they sound like silly things to reference, but we were able to then drive out to the Bath Skyline Tour, which is a brilliant walking loop. It took us about 2 hours, maybe a little bit longer. We think we saw some kites, but there's real privilege in the ability that I have to be able to do that. And that contrasts massively with my experience growing up. But the representation is really important because actually to all the world, I believe my sexuality, my social demographic background, and my historic lack of knowledge about the environment sector is invisible to people. And that's why events like today really truly matter, because when we're out in nature, we're not necessarily wearing the pride badges or the RuPaul's Drag Race sweatshirts or flying flags. So we can begin to believe that we are, to coin a phrase that many of us would have heard, the only gay in the village. We will feel like we're alone. We will feel like what we're doing is unusual. And sometimes that can make us feel challenged or unwelcome in these settings. But today is really important because we get to see each other and hear about our experiences in nature and the natural environment, because it's so enriching and so important for everybody to be able to do that. And it's really important that we can understand that we are there and we can be proud to be in nature, and that we have an equal right to enjoy these wonderful spaces. So like I said, I'm really excited that we've been able to put this on today, and I can't wait to hear from all of the other speakers and to hear some of your questions, and just have a wonderful day celebrating our experiences. So I'll hand back over to Naomi, and I really look forward to the rest of today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sean. That was really, really interesting. And it certainly ties in with some of the experiences I've got and with speaking to people out in the countryside. Last year I was out for a walk, and I talked to a couple of young gay chaps who were out walking their dog, being me, started by making a fuss of the dog. And then they actually thanked me for speaking to them, and they didn't need to. They just didn't need to. So thank you for that. In a moment, we're going to be hearing from Ben Andrews. Ben is an organic farmer based in Herefordshire. And as I said earlier, there's one particular slide. It's just absolutely amazing. So, Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Naomi. Yeah, great to be here. So yeah, thanks for inviting me along. I'll just tell you a little bit about my life as being a farmer, being out gay man as well, and what it's like on the farm. So yeah, representation in agriculture. And this first slide is a picture of some of our beef cattle grazing in rather nice field. It's got some ancient woodland in. This is a bit of a gladed area, so I'm big into agroforestry and other bits, as I'll explain a little bit further on. So a little bit of background history about me. I grew up in North Herefordshire on a farm with my parents that my great-grandfather had moved to in the 1930s, but he hadn't moved very far. He was a farmer from a farming family in Montgomeryshire, which is just about a county away, and his wife was from Shropshire, again a county away. We've been farming in and around Herefordshire for about, I think about 400 years or something, but we're tenant farmers, so we tend to sort of move around a bit. So we rent 450 acres off Oxford University, but we're very fortunate to have been able to save up some pennies and buy 150 acres of our own a couple of years ago, and we've actually been organic now for 20 years. Yeah, we're beef, vegetables, cereals, cut flowers. I mean, agri-environment schemes. So if you know, that's things like countryside stewardship, where we get paid for planting areas of wild bird seed mix. Yeah, and I'm working in partnership with my dad, which if you said that to me, say 25, 30 years ago, I would have laughed in your face, the thought of being able to be my out self. but yeah, and then that little tweet just down in the bottom, I'm sure everyone's seen that by now, but it's very true. And in lockdown, pretty much as I turned 40, I suddenly started getting a little bit obsessed with birds and identifying all the different birds we've got on our farm. So on to the next slide, and on top of the farming stuff that I do, I've been using Instagram now for quite a few years to talk about food production and farming in the UK, dispel some myths, also sort of call out ways in which we can farm better, but also just trying to normalise being an LGBTQ plus farmer. I'm a Soil Association agroecology ambassador, which means I talk about agroecology and nature-friendly farming, but also one of the founding members of a little organisation group, should we call it, called AgRespect. So we've been working to improve diversity and inclusion within agriculture. It's not really big. It's not really a club or a group or it's just a bunch of people who we got together and started chatting about representation in agriculture, and it's rather nebulous thing. There's no strict formal structure to it, but we just get together at various agricultural shows, do a couple of prides, but I'll talk a bit more about that later. So yeah, growing up in the countryside, I mean, I don't need to tell everyone on this call that yeah, you kind of know pretty early on, don't you? And especially growing up in an area that is so conservative, where all the men farm and play rugby and all the women stay at home and cook and do these very structured gender roles, and it was, yeah, you sort of like had to sort of like keep it all on the down low. And Section 28 means that I probably knew I was gay before I even knew the word for it. Which is quite a you know, weird feeling. Just I remember a kid at school going, like, opening a dictionary and going, like, laughing at the definition of gay, and I was like, oh okay, yeah, so it's like me, just quietly to myself. But yeah, growing up again during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s, you know, terrified by that Tombstone advert and parents telling me, don't worry, you don't need to worry about that. And then witch hunts in the media, George Michael and the media portrayal of LGBTQ plus people, and you're very much expected to just be a man and to do manly stuff and be a farmer and get married and have kids and just keep it going. The next slide, please. So yeah, but actually, like, you know, coming out and the homophobia within the local community, bearing in mind that, you know, you're around people that, you know, most of your friends are the children of your parents' friends, and you know, when you've been farming in the area for hundreds of years, you end up related to most people. So probably good job I didn't have any kids. But yeah, homophobia actually was really minimal. I think a lot of the issues were internal, and not having the support network, the environment where I felt safe to come out. So although it wasn't necessarily overtly homophobic, it wasn't really a particularly liberal and warm environment to come out to. But the only really bad case of homophobia was my uncle, and it was, yeah, quite nasty, quite a horrible experience. But it's one that sort of I've moved past, and the number of people who are so incredible and welcoming, and just really, it's a non-issue, and allow me to be my actual true self. I don't have to filter around friends and family. But social media can be a pretty nasty place. I keep off Facebook and Twitter as a bit of a hellhole, but I try to use it for positive use, and have had some incredible messages from people saying that just by being on social media, it really has helped them. And the homophobia does often come from places of ignorance. I don't know if anybody saw the Instagram post that Natural England shared, and there were a few pretty nasty comments on there. Thing is not to rise to it, not to fight back. It only just it's like throwing petrol on a fire. Just to be inquisitive and to try to build a bit of a bridge, because if you just like put up that aggressive exterior, then it just drives that wedge a bit deeper. And I don't think anybody's quite past redemption on that. But one of the things, I want to be judged on whether I'm a good farmer, and there's always that sort of bit of a, I don't know if anyone else has had it, but you do worry that if you're not a good farmer, then people are going to say he's not a good farmer because he's gay. But yeah, you just want to be judged on what you do, not who you are. So next slide, please. So I've found just the visibility to be most powerful weapon in fighting for acceptance into my line of work. Just being able to be myself, I think, makes people realise that us LGBTQ plus folk aren't like the nasty sort of grooming bogeymen that the media would like to portray us as. And when you start doing that, and you start meeting other people, and you realise quite how many of us there are in rural communities, and there are quite a few of us in Herefordshire, and it's really nice to be able to connect with people and being able to chat about our experiences. And I do feel like with social media, having sort of built up quite a following of, there's a bit of a sense of duty that with a platform that it would be a bit unfair to not use that to try and do something positive, and to help maybe empower other people. And I like to just casually drop it into, if I was being interviewed for something, just drop sort of like partners' names, whatever, into conversation. I mean, one of the things was, however, I moved back to the countryside when I was with my partner at the time, and unfortunately a couple of years ago we split up. Seeing sort of life in the countryside as an out gay man now, and single is very much a different world to try and navigate, and that brings its own sort of issues with it, but it's still absolutely the place that I would always choose to be. But being a cis white guy is a privilege, and I'm well aware that, having been born into a farming family, although not like owning hundreds of thousands of acres, to being a tenant farmer, I still understand that I am in so much better position than a lot of other people, whether those are people sort of like having to move to rural areas with their parents as kids and not wanting to, whether it's sort of people as farm workers who are maybe scared of coming out to their bosses, their employers, so many other ways that hopefully just I can help to empower people. But so AgRespect is kind of like where all that came from. I don't know if anybody knows Matt Naylor. He's a big cheese behind AgRespect. He's an incredible guy. He gave me a call a few years back now after seeing a piece on Countryfile about gay farmers and about how the higher levels of depression and suicide amongst closeted gay farmers. And we found that was, I mean, it's so true. It's so true, and there's no denying that. But it is also, we don't feel it's necessarily positive to just use that as as something to lead with, because I don't think it gives closeted people living in rural communities any sort of hope for coming out. So we felt that if we could showcase various people's stories, that we could give a little bit more positivity to it, to give people hope that they can live their normal, authentic lives in the countryside. Yeah, we started with the website, put some stories on there, and got people in the ag industry, sort of like Farmers Weekly, NFU, people to sign a pledge to say that they are all for the promotion of diversity and inclusion within their organisations. We've got Facebook and WhatsApp groups, so if you are interested in joining, go over to Facebook. I don't run that because I've got nothing to do with Facebook because I hate it, but if you're on it, then cool. And yeah, we do meetups at agricultural events, so if you're at Lammer, if you like, going kicking tires on tractors, or if you're at Groundswell, there's always somebody. And we have got people in AgRespect from little beef farmers down in Cornwall right the way up to farmers in the north of Scotland, all over the country. Every single part of agriculture is represented, as well as people, vets, agronomists, all those little industries, all those little different parts of the industry, not just the farmers. And then, so the Pride events that we've done, we started off at Brighton Pride, which is incredible. If anyone's ever been to Brighton Pride, the feeling of like walking down the parade, there's 500,000 people, I think, go to Brighton. It's incredible. The atmosphere is wild. So we had Sassy Ferguson, which is the Massey Ferguson, all liveried up in rainbow vinyl. And these are the picture that the guy says, Matt up on the back of the tractor, then Carl, Julie, Amy, and Ben Firth. And yeah, it was a phenomenal experience, and one of the first where I'd been in a group of farmers, like LGBT farmers, where you can talk about the shared experiences of farmers and being part of the LGBT community. So it's the first time I'd ever had a chance to do that, which was, it was incredible. So we've done events at the Oxford Farming Conference, which is a big industry event down in Oxford. There's an Oxford Real Farming Conference as well, which you'll find me at that with the other hippies. And then we've got we've done Birmingham Pride, London Pride last year, again incredible. So yeah, just need to get planning and do something for this year, because I haven't done anything yet, nobody else has, and time's ticking, but hoping maybe Cardiff. I haven't done Wales yet. So yeah, on to the next one. So yeah, there's a big difference between representation and the tokenism, and one of the things that started to irritate me a bit was that it's important to be represented in the industry, and the saying, you need to see to be, and I think that's still really powerful. You need to be able to see yourself in an industry to feel like you have a place there, or it is possible for you to get there. But it has felt a little bit sometimes like as soon as Pride Month comes around, I get all the emails from journalists, start flooding my inbox. Oh, can we talk to you about Life as a Gay Farm? Can we talk to you about coming out? And it's, I've like gone over the same conversations with them, 100 times. I could just send them a link to an article I done about 5 years ago. So it just does feel sometimes like, we're only sort of, we only exist for 1 month a year. I'd like to be able to talk about farming, my farming, the farming that I do. Again, here's some of our cattle grazing down on our river meadows with one of the most fantastic oak trees. I enjoy talking about the farming and the nature and the biodiversity on the farm more than I enjoy talking about being a gay man. I don't shy away from talking about it, but it is not the most interesting thing about me. Yeah, I just, if I can put it in somewhere, try and use, don't be too like gender neutral when I'm talking about dating or whatever, but it's, it is not the most important thing about me, and it's not something that I choose to be, I want to be judged on. I want to be judged on the farming that I do. So next slide. And so, yeah, just to sum it all up, really, sort of like benefits of diversity are, you see it everywhere. And diversity pretty much is always universally better than homogeneity. So the diverse crop rotations that we have in our mixed farming system just means that we're more resilient to environmental and market uncertainty. Diverse farms help to boost biodiversity. This little hare on the farm, I love him. It's always sunning itself. And diverse diets for livestock and ourselves improve health for our livestock, health for us. And then diversity within the industry can bring new ideas and solutions to problems that we that the usual archetypal stereotypical idea of a farmer might not be able to bring. And we do have a massive skills gap in agriculture, and so the more people that we can encourage into the industry, the better. And also, for people who may be born into farming families, who want to farm, who feel like they can't, who feel like they don't belong here, to maybe not lose them to another industry, to say yes, you can still work in agriculture. You don't have to choose between your authentic life and farming. And then for people moving to the countryside, or visiting, just to be able to say, it's not all crazy people with pitchforks. There's a nice diverse bunch of us, and so come and visit.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks very much, and I'll hand back over to Naomi.
Thank you, Ben. That was truly, genuinely inspiring all the way through. I'm going to have to sit and watch the recording of this. I saw someone ask earlier on if this is being recorded. Yes, it is, but I'm going to have to sit back and watch that just to take some more of it in. It's amazing what you've been doing, and seeing all those people, or knowing there were all of those people behind Sassy Ferguson there, quite apart from the fact that I absolutely love the name Sassy Ferguson, just knowing that all those people behind the tractor, that was amazing. So thank you so much for that. We're going to be going into a break now, and we'll be coming back at 20 past. So thank you everyone who's been listening, been speaking. So much looking forward to it, carrying on a little while, and we'll see you at 20 past. Good morning, people, and welcome back. That was an amazing first session. And we're now about to hear from Nina Seal at Nina Wild Rights on Instagram. Nina's pronouns are she and they, and they're a writer, a conservationist, a cabaret performer, and a trustee. And I'm really looking forward to this session. Nina, across to you.
Thank you so much, Naomi, and to Natural England for inviting me today. As Naomi just said, and I'm going to repeat, I'm a writer and editor with a career in conservation communications. I studied zoology at Edinburgh University. I am currently communications manager for Synchronicity Earth, an international wildlife charity which specializes in overlooked and underfunded species and ecosystems. I'm also a trustee of BugLife, which is Europe's only organization dedicated to the conservation of all invertebrates. I'm also a queer cabaret performer and producer, but I'll get back to that. I'll admit I found it really hard to decide what I'm going to talk about today when I first heard the theme, which is representation matters. For a long time during my studies and my career, there hasn't been any representation of queerness in nature. If you had asked me why queer representation in nature matters 6 years ago, I wouldn't have known the answer. But while I was preparing this talk a few weeks ago, I saw something in Pink News, a queer news outlet, that gave me an idea of where to start. So I'm going to talk about the word unnatural. During this year's Super Bowl, Volkswagen released an advert that features a lesbian couple, and in response, an organization called 1 Million Mums released a statement condemning Volkswagen, saying, even though homosexuality is unnatural, this advertisement is pushing the LGBTQ agenda. If you are a queer person who enjoys spending time in nature and learning about wildlife, that word doesn't just alienate you from the people around you, but from what otherwise is a source of joy and wonder. And the worst thing is, calling queer people unnatural just isn't true, and that's why representation matters. But even though I've been fascinated by the natural world my entire life, I studied zoology, I was a nature guide, and I've been a conservationist for my entire career. Up until recently, I probably also would have told you that queerness wasn't inherent in the natural world. It's not even that I didn't know about it. I was a zoology student and journalist at Edinburgh when Edinburgh Zoo had male penguins pairing off and displaying mating together. But my opinions followed what the academic world and the media told me, thinking it was a fluke, some odd quirk outside of evolution and only seen inside the strange environment of a zoo. It is this way of thinking that I was susceptible to that I want to talk about today. The assumption of cisgender heterosexuality as the norm, and therefore the natural and unquestionable. Last year, I read Lucy Cook's fantastic new book, Bitch. If you haven't read it, I've got it here, I'm going to show it to you. I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic exploration of how much scientific thinking in zoology and evolutionary science has been shaped by the patriarchal ideas of males and females through the lens of cisgender heterosexuality. We have missed so many exciting discoveries and discussions because academia was limited by the assumption that gender and sex is limited to the binary, to aggressive males and passive females who would only ever have sex with each other in the never-ending battle to pass on their genes. But there are so many examples of queerness in nature that I could become entirely sidetracked by them in this talk. Gay penguins are just the start. Lesbian lizards are a thing in the all-female colonies of mourning geckos and desert grassland whiptails. Nearly a quarter of all black swan families are parented by 2 males. And I'm sure it will surprise no one that flamingos are also really gay. Our closest living relatives, the bonobos, have infamous sex lives, and roughly 60% of all bonobo sex is between 2 or more females. In the last year, I've seen more conversations about this than I ever have before. I've been to events on queer nature run by the British Library, the South Bank Centre and Kew Gardens. I'd really like to shout out one of my friends from the London drag scene who's called Bi-Curious George, who performed in many of these events. He's a drag king with acts specialising in queer ecology, and he has a touring show called Queer Planet. So I recommend you look him up, Bi-Curious George. There is so much to talk about when we start looking beyond the binary in zoology and exploring how our ideas of sex, gender, and sexuality have been expanded in the animal kingdom. But what is still prevalent somehow is the idea that this is unnatural. The study of the natural world is so tainted by the lens that human behavior is the norm, and that within human society, cisgender heterosexuality is the norm, that this seeps into our study of the natural world. One of the stories from Lucy's book, Bitch, is about the Laysan albatross, the females of which cannot physically lay more than one egg. And yet, since 1919, there have been recorded instances of nests with 2 birds and 2 eggs. Now, because I'm doing this talk as part of a queer nature event, you're like, well, obviously, they're gay birds, but it didn't occur to anyone to look or check until 2004, when a female researcher tested the sex of these couples and found that they were 2 females. She thought she'd made a mistake. She went back and double checked her work, and then she thought no one would believe her. That was still how strange the idea of homosexuality being natural was then. But that was 2004. This is 2024. We must have moved on. Spoiler, we haven't. You may have heard that this month, the first recorded instance of humpback whales having sex was recorded. And it was 2 males. But despite all the evidence of homosexuality being common in nature, some of the scientific inquiry has still been based in this concept that it must be unnatural. Now, I don't disagree with the idea of asking why animals behave in a certain way. I studied zoology. I love asking why. I want to know why. I love the idea that seeing homosexuality in nature, it shows that sex goes beyond the evolutionary drive to pass on genes, something that we as humans know very well and shouldn't be surprised to see. But some of the scientific thought about why these 2 male whales were having sex shows the bias in academia today and homophobia. This includes speculation that it was an accident, that one whale mistook the other for a female, or that it was somehow predatory, blaming one whale for taking advantage of the other one because of an injury. I'm not saying these can't be true. The animal kingdom is rife with predatory sexual behavior, but these speculations do assume that the only time we have ever seen humpback males mating must have been a super extraordinary occurrence, a freak accident of nature, when perhaps, if you think about the mechanics of the fact that male whales have a genital slit, and the chances that the first and only observation of humpback whale sex must have been a super rare homosexual behavior, probably means that it wasn't rare at all. A scientist who has quite a lot to say about how much discredit the assumption of cis heterosexuality has done to zoology is Dr. Joan Roughgarden, who says, suppressing the full story of gender and sexuality denies diverse people their right to feel at one with nature. The true story of nature is profoundly empowering for peoples of minority gender expressions and sexualities. So this brings me to my personal experience. The assumption of queerness to be unnatural has a lot of similarities with something called compulsory heteronormativity, or CompHet, which is what I'm going to call it, which affects queer people all the time and has a particular impact for bisexual people like myself. CompHet is the way society trains us for heterosexuality, assumes we are heterosexual, and influences our behavior as such. For example, for me, I understood that I was bisexual as soon as I learned the term as a teenager, but all my significant relationships were with men for a long time, and I assumed I was much less attracted to other genders until I became a cabaret performer and started spending time in queer spaces for the first time, which don't center heterosexuality, where queerness is normalized and often assumed. I realized just how often I had always assumed that the women in my life were straight, and how often I had not let myself entertain the possibility of romantic or sexual attraction to them. Turns out I'm much gayer than I realized. We're going to take a short entertainment break here because I'm going to start talking about becoming a cabaret artist and how working and performing in queer spaces granted me the representation that I needed for a really long time. And one of my acts uses nature, the idea of spring, the gayest season in my opinion, to express how it feels to be able to bloom and express yourself properly as a queer person. I originally made this act inspired by the concept of rewilding, but it started to change, as art always does, as a reflection of the journey that I have had over the last few years. And when I was booked to perform with London Pride last year in the West End, I upgraded the costume to become about queer expression. The costume is inspired by British spring. It has daffodils, daisies, roses, wisteria, and crocuses. But for this performance, I made a new Pride headdress with the rainbow flag colours. And I have hair garlands that you probably won't be able to see in the video, but they are the colours of the trans Pride flag for solidarity. And I swapped the green fans that I use in the act for rainbow ones. So Johnny, if you don't mind, could you play part 1?
Shining now. Tonight I'll be dancing around. I'm off on the road to Galway now. Look how she's off in the town. She's off on the search for sailors. Look, there's fine fellas here to be found. She's never been one to stay at home. Home you'll go and it's there you'll say you've work to do in the morning. Give up your dream of going away. Forget your sailors and going. Cheddar, why you cheddar, why you ready? Cheddar, why you go smart, so why you my father, what a good cheddar. Down to the lots of Galway, where there's fine sailors walking the sand and waiting to meet the ladies there. Watch now, he's singing along, he's finer than any sailor, so come on now, stick your spoons, he's waiting to hear you play the woo! Here today and she's gone tomorrow, and next she's going to Galway, jigging around and off to town and won't be back until morning. Cheddar, why you begging? Cheddar, why you 'cause fun, so why you my father, why you good gentleman?
Thank you for that, Johnny. Cabaret is a vastly underrated live art form, in my opinion. It gives artists so much creative expression, not just because there's so much queer representation, but because most acts are concepted, choreographed, and costumed by the person who then performs it, which means you have so much freedom to shapeshift, explore your identity, and tell the stories that you want to tell. That costume was partly made by a friend, an ex-colleague of mine from the conservation sector, who made all the bases, but all the embellishment on the costume was hand sewed on by myself. I found things to look like the natural world for that costume. The gender play in drag is a great example of how self-expression within the queer art form of cabaret can help people learn more about themselves. I know so many people, including myself, I have a couple of drag acts that use drag as a way of playing and exploring their gender expression to learn more about how they can express themselves more authentically off stage as well. So the final point I'd like to make today is about the kind of transformation that can happen when someone has the chance to express themselves properly. When you're in an environment that welcomes you to explore your self-expression, very often the person who comes out is in a different shape. I think queer people are sometimes accused of being fickle because of this, because we change our identities several times as we work out who we are. For one thing, a fluid identity doesn't make it any less valid, and that's something that needs to be more widely accepted. And for another, transformation is entirely, to use a really great word for it, natural. Last year, I heard a queer author called Sabrina Imbler talk about how animals shed their skins and how being queer can often feel like metamorphosis. They particularly spoke about a moth with the fantastic name Gumleaf Skeletonizer, which keeps its old heads in every molt, stacking them above its head in an ever-growing headdress. Sabrina said, "I hoard my old selves too," which resonates hard with me. My identity has changed over the last few years as I've been in an environment that has helped me explore and express myself. I now haven't been attracted to men for so long that I often wonder if I'm gay and no longer bisexual. But I look back on who I have been and who I thought I was, as if they were old skins that I have shed. They don't fit me anymore, but they did once. I really recommend Sabrina's book, which I'm going to show you as well. Oh, it's blurred out. Here we go. My Life in Sea Creatures. It's a beautiful memoir which uses the natural world to describe their life and particularly their queer identity for more ways that the natural world can help us understand ourselves. So finally, I would like to show you what transformation means to me when we are free to express ourselves. We are queer. We are entirely natural. And we thrive in diversity just as the natural world does. I would like to end with the climax of my spring act that I just showed you, which expresses this feeling the best way that I can. Johnny, please play the second video. Thank you.
Or the flu of home, I'm home down to go.
Apologies for getting a bit emotional there right at the end, but sometimes it's really hard to say something just as simple as we are queer and it is natural. Anyway, thank you very much for having me today, and back to you, Naomi.
Nina, thank you. I have just realised during everything you were showing there what the word fabulous was actually invented for. That was absolutely amazing. It was deep. It was emotional. Thank you for it. Again, I'm going to come back to this on the recording and rewatch. That was wow. I think it's the only word I can really find for it. Going to be a very hard act to follow, but we have folk to follow. Lily K. Bright is up next. Lily is a writer, a facilitator, a textile artist, and obsessed with city nature. And I'm really looking forward to what they're going to be telling us now. Expecting it to be equally fabulous. Lily, over to you.
Thank you, Naomi. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you. My talk is called In Celebration of Community. So hopefully the slide's appearing as we speak. There we go. And it's about some of the people and places which have been supporting and sustaining me on my journey. So yes, this talk is about queer nature because we're at Pride in Nature. It's also about Blackness and creativity and community and grassroots activism, because these things are inseparable for me. Yeah. So my name is Lily K. Bright, and I'm a writer, facilitator, textile artist, coach, trainer, spoken word performer. I could go on. I have ADHD and it comes out in what I spend my time doing. This slide is about the first group that I want to celebrate, which is an organisation called Wild in the City. Wild in the City is an organisation by and for people of colour that's dedicated to supporting our connections with nature. In the spring of 2019, I participated in a programme called Nature Connectors, where over 6 consecutive Sundays, we went to woodlands and forests in and around Croydon for a few hours at a time. And we talked about our relationship with nature, if any, learned bushcraft skills like how to start and sustain a fire, building shelters, and identifying different plants and animals. And this experience literally changed my life because I wasn't really very connected with nature before that. And over the course of these Sundays, I became absolutely obsessed with trees. And it's what led me to go and learn more about trees with the Woodland Trust, with the Field Studies Council, CityLit, and many other organisations. And I can't put into words how much of a difference those 6 Sundays made to my life, because nothing that has happened afterwards could have happened without it. And the next slide is about the writer development agency Spread the Word. I was selected to be one of 10 participants on the Future is Back programme, which is a writer development programme for queer writers that was designed and led by the author Olumide Papula, who has supported so many writers in so many ways over the years. And it was participating in this program that I first started to believe that writing could be more than a hobby for me. That's a thought I'd never entertained before, even though writing has been like a love of my life for as long as I can remember. And part of the reason for that was the practical industry knowledge that we were exposed to, as well as the time that we dedicated to honing our craft. And this program culminated in my first performance, which there's a bit of the photo in the slide there, which was at Gaze the Word, which is an LGBT bookshop in London. And I've since performed at Common Press, which is a queer bookshop, and Brixton Library, amongst other places. The next slide is for the London Wildlife Trust, which is a charity that exists to look after and educate people about woodlands, parks, and commons in London. When I left the tech industry to prioritise my writing and became self-employed a couple of years ago, I started a writing residency that was a collaboration between Spread the Word and the London Wildlife Trust. And as a writer in residence, I led writing workshops and wrote poetry and short stories in and inspired by London Wildlife Trust sites such as Sydenham Hillwood. And these are published in the This Is Our Place anthology, which is here. And you can read that online on the Spread the Word website. And I later had the opportunity to work with the London Wildlife Trust again, delivering nature writing workshops for marginalised young people for a year in the Nature Nurtures programme. And there's an anthology for that too, which I co-wrote the introduction for, which is also available at the Spread the Word website. And the next slide shows the homepage of With Many Roots, which is a climate action organisation that catalysed my climate action. And it did that by introducing me to climate science via creativity. So With Many Roots runs a climate fiction writing group, and that was my way in. And I then went on to attend a training about climate science, and then I went on to attend a training that taught me how to facilitate those sessions myself. So all of that was with Many Roots. I now teach other people about climate science using an interactive and collaborative game called the Climate Fresque. And one of the things I really appreciate about With Many Roots is that it specifically has a climate justice stance, which is not true for all climate action organisations or groups. And having a social justice lens is really important in every area of life, but I think especially when it comes to the climate crisis, in terms of centering the people who are most impacted by it and holding accountable those of us who are most contributing to it. The next slide is from Misery Medicine, which is a series of events by a collective I'm a member of, which is called Misery Party. Misery Party is a sober mental health collective by and for queer people of colour. And over the last couple of years, Misery Party has been leading these monthly misery medicine walks and gatherings outdoors. And it's the most inclusive and nourishing and nurturing organisation that I've ever worked with, because there's so much care from the other facilitators and organisers, both to participants, but also when we're working with each other. I felt so much love and care and support. And it was my introduction to medical herbalism. And I feel so blessed that I've gotten to meet so many amazing herbalists. It's been so nourishing for me to connect with different ways of healing, especially with healthcare inequalities, which can make accessing healthcare really challenging, especially for marginalised people. And so on the left is from an event that I was co-facilitating, and on the right is a medical herbalism that I attended at an ITAL community garden in South London. The next slide shows some photos from a cyanotype workshop by Queer Botany. So it's nature and creativity together again. When I first encountered Queer Botany a couple of years ago, I wasn't aware of any other events around queer ecology. It was the first place that I personally saw events around the subject. And now I've seen loads of different groups and events, some of which I've been leading and facilitating, but plenty more others as well. And I think it's really exciting and shows the impact of what representation can do. And because I got involved with Queer Botany and led workshops there, I've been offered to work running queer botanical events in other places. So the slide I had right at the beginning was from an event, Queer Nature Walk I led at Loughborough University. So there's real material benefit from having representation as well. And the picture on the right-hand side is some artwork that I created using lavender and violets, which are both symbols of queerness. On the next slide, this is a photo from an away day with a cooperative called We Got to Move, which is a nature-based cooperative of strength training, care and strategic organising, mostly based in Birmingham. I'm a member of the cooperative and we're working towards creating a healing and training centre in nature. We've got some events coming later in the year that we're planning, so keep an eye out for those. And one of the things I really appreciate about We Got to Move is that, like Misery, our ways of working are aligned with our values around care and being compassionate to ourselves and to other people, which is so important. And so we're embodying working in sustainable and regenerative ways. And it's really awesome to be in that kind of working environment where we're distributing work according to our capacity and really being understanding of, things that can come up and change for each of us. It's so nourishing working with people who are so understanding and communicative, and it means that we can be more effective than if we were working in more normative ways. And working with these folks has helped me to do more movement myself, which has been really important for me as a disabled person and someone who lives with fatigue and mobility and joint considerations. And working with people who really care about approaching the body and movement in compassionate and non-judgmental ways has made such a difference for me, especially as a fat person as well. And the next slide shows photographs from an activity weekend in Dorset by an organisation called Wanderers of Colour, which is a group by and for people of colour being more active. And there's so many events with this group, including climbing and hiking and skiing, all these different activities. It's a really active group, and most of those are outdoors and in nature. I was awarded a bursary last year to take swimming lessons and participate in this activity weekend, which was all oriented around water. And I've been terrified of large bodies of water since I was about 11 or 12. So it was a really big deal for me to even think about going to swimming lessons, never mind kayaking on the sea, which I did do. And it was only possible because of this group, which, you know, the financial assistance, but also being in a community of really supportive people was so encouraging, so compassionate. You know, even when I was really emotional on the sea and just working through all of my fears and everything, it's made such a difference for me. And yeah, if you're a person of colour who'd like to move more, I really recommend that you check it out. There's lots of events happening. Most of them are in London, but there have been in other places like this one, which was in Dorset. And the next slide is from the Queer Nature Festival, which took place 5 months ago in October at Kew Gardens. And so on the left, I'm giving a speech at Kew Gardens in the Temperate House, and the right has some information about a performance that I did, which was a sound installation, a poem that I wrote called Queer Echoes in the Canopies. And there were different artists and activists who were interviewed, and we had the videos playing in the Temperate House as well. And it was really exciting for me to have my work be in Kew Gardens because I visited those gardens so many times. And it was really great to have an audience there. And this is another opportunity that came about because of my work with Queer Botany. The next slide is in celebration of learning and education. So there is a charitable organisation called the WEA, which exists to provide financially accessible education to adults. And because it does that, I started learning how to use textiles in December 2022. So on the left is the first thing I ever created, which is a patchwork coaster. And I was only able to access this because it's a financially accessible course, which also does bursaries as well. And because the course was a really short commitment, I wasn't sure if this was something that I would be able to do. But I thought, well, I'll go along. It's only a couple of hours on a weekend, and it's online, so you know I can access it. And I really loved it. And I've gone on to do loads of different textile things that are usually coming back to nature. On the right is a piece that I created in a negative space embroidery class. And this is the first piece where I designed what I was embroidering myself, which was really exciting for me. And yeah, there's so many things that I've become involved with in terms of textiles that are only possible because I went to that first course. And if we move to the next slide, this is for Morley College, where I'm studying part-time at the moment. And so these are some images of different projects that I've created at college. And I love this course so much. I would happily talk about it at great length, maybe another time. And it's amazing to be in a supportive and encouraging environment that's so creatively nourishing. And I explore the natural world in my work, even in the projects that are not directly referencing the natural world. They've all been inspired by it in some way. So on the left, that piece is inspired by an installation at Kew Gardens, where there's a cherry tree avenue that was adorned with lights for the Christmas at Kew event. So that directly inspired the image on the left. And there's a picture of that installation at the top. And that installation has gone on to inspire the other projects that came afterwards. So I've been exploring light bulbs a lot in screen printing. And then the one on the right is a millinery project that's also inspired by that. So what's next? this is a preview of some of the things that I have coming up. So for those of you who are in London, there's a performance next week, Thursday, that I'm participating in, the ADHD Babes Scratch Night. And ADHD Babes is a support group by and for Black ADHD women and non-binary people. Everyone's welcome to come to the event. So yeah, if you're around, come and check it out. It'll be great to see you there. And on the right, the image at the top is to represent my creative project. So one of the projects I'm working on is inspired by painted lady butterflies and is an interdisciplinary project that uses textiles and writing to explore ancestry and Afrofuturism, diaspora belonging. And it's something I'm really excited about. So watch this space for that. And at the bottom of that slide is a note about Queer Ecologies, which is a program that has just begun of lots of different kinds of events all around queer ecology. And events are in person and online. There's a mixture of events by different people. So yeah, maybe I will see you at one of those events. And all that's left for me to say is I have a question for you, which is, what's your Pride in Nature story? I'd love to hear it. Feel free to get in touch with me on Instagram or via my website. My details are on the slides, so you can check those out. Visit me at cherrytreewalk.com or on Instagram, and I've got links to all of the organizations and groups that I mentioned in my talk on there as well. So thank you very much. Handing back to Naomi now.
Thank you very much indeed, Lily. And again, I'm in absolute awe of your talents there with the millinery, the needlework, the writing, the speaking, the everything. And going down to Dorset, facing your fear, being out on a kayak. But I'm going to get away from Dorset as fast as I can, because if I start banging on about the geology there, I'm a geologist, then we'll be here forever. So I'm going to say thank you ever so much for that. We'll be hearing from you more later in the Q&A. And I'm going to pass the microphone over to Joe Friend of Pepper Studios. He's the director, he's the founder, and Pepper Studio is an award-winning social agency. So, Joe, over to you.
Thanks very much, Naomi. And it's an honour to be speaking during this year's Pride in Nature event. Yes, as Naomi said, I'm a co-founder and director of an influencer marketing agency. And today I think I have a very different presentation to share with you. I've named it We Are All Influencers. And I'd like to share my experience of growing up in the countryside and how that's influenced life-changing decisions for me. So I'll kick things off on the next slide by explaining, first of all, what influence means to me. So everybody talks about how influencer marketing is a new channel, but actually I tend to think of it quite differently. From a marketing perspective, it's existed for hundreds of years, way before social media was even created. And there's evidence to suggest that actually it was the royals that were amongst the first to use this method. You'll likely find anecdotes about Josiah Wedgwood, who was an English potter from the late 1700s, who used Queen Charlotte as a celebrity to bolster the market appeal of his pottery lines. The term influence exists in many formats, and you can see on the screen here the quote, influence, the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something. Now, I'm a gay millennial man. I was born in Plymouth, and for those that don't know, that's in Devon. It's the last city before Cornwall. And the environment which I grew up in has fundamentally changed how I think about the term influence. And it mostly comes from being a member of the LGBTQ+ community, especially in a rural place. And I hope after my session, whether you are a member yourself or you're an ally, you will think about this term differently too. And it's my mission to help you remember moments that you've been influenced, both online and offline, or maybe even unwillingly, you have influenced others. Now I'll set the scene on the next slide. I spent my life growing up in an environment that was very difficult, to be honest with myself. The rolling hills of Devon are undeniably beautiful, but some of the locals' behaviours towards the LGBTQ plus community weren't always so forthcoming, especially when I was growing up in secondary school years across the noughties. Some of what I'll be sharing next relates actually to what Sean Cornwell at the start of Pride in Nature discussed this morning. Social media didn't exist in current formats back then. I didn't have a role model that I could follow online and become influenced by, but I did become influenced offline in the format of music, which you can see here. I joined a still band. It was about 21 years ago now. It feels much shorter away. And it was the people that made me make this decision. It was fascinating to me. A culturally and ethnically diverse group of people who came together and played music as a way of escaping reality where nothing else really mattered and there was no judgment. The people I'd met not only introduced me to this incredible instrument, but they influenced me to try new food, new drink, music, and genuinely gave me a very different perspective of life. Now, since being in the band, we've performed all over the country. And as you can see in this picture, a highlight for me was performing at Brighton Pride. And Ben Andrews said this morning, over 500,000 people attend this. And actually, it's one of the best Pride events I've attended. And I wish I had time to take an entertainment break, like Nina showed you earlier, where I could show you a rendition of Dancing Queen, which became so popular, security needed to actually lead the crowd away from our float as it became a bit of a bottleneck in the streets of Brighton. Now, despite having this musical safety net and being influenced by my still band whilst growing up, I still didn't feel comfortable with sharing that I was a gay man until later on in my life. And I only knew a few people who were open about their sexuality then. And as I said, I didn't have idols who could influence me to be more open with my friends, my family, or even myself. It's very different these days, especially with social influencers. They offer advice across a multitude of subjects for both young and mature people, and I believe it's making a big difference. On the next slide, I want to let you know a bit more about my earlier career, which influenced me in making life-changing decisions. For a decade before entering the influencer space, I worked in commercial radio. And the roles I had varied from a street promotion team in Devon and Cornwall to running the advertising for some of the country's largest music and theatre companies from our head office in London. And it was during this career I met my partner, Tom, 3 years into the role, but now a partner of 13 years. And it was the first time I truly found a balance and really felt happy being in my own skin. But with happiness came realization for some of the people that in Devon and Cornwall weren't prepared to be as accepting as me. I received a fair amount of passing comments when engaging with potential radio listeners because of being a gay man. And it was from this moment I knew there's a lot more to be done to create an environment where people could be honest with themselves about and not have any fear, in particular this part of the country. In the 10 years of working at Global Radio, my role changed considerably as I progressed within the company. And I moved into a more of a local sales role where I'd helped create local advertisement strategies to help influence audiences on where to shop. Even having a senior role in the business, I still encountered quite difficult situations where some of the local businesses would not be prepared to work with me because of my sexuality. And a particular memory of mine was with a garden centre in South Hams, just outside of Plymouth, who would often pledge on their radio advertisements that they cater for all needs and they invite everybody to visit. And as time progressed, I was forced to pass this account to another person working at the radio station because of how little they wanted to engage with me because of my sexuality. But it didn't stop me. It only influenced me to make a change. And I took the biggest jump of my life to date. So I packed my bags and I left the countryside with my partner, Tom, and we headed to London. And this is why influence is important to me. If I hadn't met Tom, I hadn't been influenced to make this decision, then would I have maybe stayed in Devon? Would I have continued living and working with people who are quick to make judgment? Flipping this on its head, if I had social influences to engage with online when I was younger, would I have made a decision to move to London sooner, or maybe another more open city? Ultimately, the process of influence has led me on to better things. And with all the negative press that associates social media being a negative space, there is equally so much good too. And I hope that in my slides coming up, I can help to shine a light on this. Now, I want to talk briefly about once I arrived in London on the next slide too. So I started running the live entertainment team in Leicester Square's head office for Global Radio. And the first campaign I ever worked on was actually to organise global ticket sales for Beyonce's tour, as if they needed me. And it was a brilliant campaign to start with. So from seaside to city, I was so excited to not only live, but work in such an LGBTQ plus friendly city and office. And I was surrounded by the most diverse team I'd ever had the pleasure of working with. Now, I never thought I would leave radio, having launched incredible campaigns, which includes outside broadcast in Disneyland Paris with Emma Bunton and a junket with Jack Black to release the blockbuster hit Kung Fu Panda 3. However, here's an example when someone close to you can influence you. So Tom, my partner, saw a posting online and recommended I applied for it. And he influenced me to change my career to try something new. I got the job and I started working for an influencer marketing agency in Shoreditch. And the thought of working with real people particularly excited me. The inventory of influencer marketing is humans, and that means I get to influence people and various audiences across social media platforms. The first influencer agency I joined was more of a programmatic solution for brands where they could jump in, self-serve their own campaigns. But I specifically looked after the campaign delivery team, where we would strategize, build, and launch campaigns on behalf of the brands. And this was a light bulb moment for me. Platforms, influencer platforms specifically, are great for brands that want to work quickly, but they're not so great when it comes to ensuring your campaigns hold a well-balanced, diverse campaign where you blossom relationships from the very start. An influencer platform restricts you, not only being able to work with talent that are only available on that platform, whereas a campaign delivery team would source influencers that were right for you, catering for all audience pools ranging from different ethnicities, sexualities, and abilities. 2 years on into that first role, I was made redundant. However, within 24 hours of being let go, like phoenixes rising from the ashes, Pepper was born with my two business partners, Alice Jones and Becky Flint. And now I'd like to take an opportunity to formally introduce Pepper on the next slide. So Pepper, being a co-founder of Pepper, I'm really proud to help create authentic storytelling partnerships. The ethos that we hold is to create content that feels editorial, not advertorial. And not only do we have an impact on marketing objectives, we really have a positive impact on working with real people. We make conscious efforts to partner with a range of diverse creators on every campaign that we launch. Growing this business is what's influenced me now to move back to Devon, where I'm based today in Plymouth. And we're a fully remote agency. And I'm very lucky that I get to mix nature with the seaside, the moors and woodlands on my doorstep, with business where I visit London at least once a month. And I now have the opportunity to work with very open-minded, incredibly talented people across the country. 5 years on, we're now one of the UK's fastest growing independent creator-first social media agencies, and we specialise in a unique international service we've named the Human Approach. In my next slide, I want to explain what the human approach means, because this leads me nicely into showcasing some of the work that I have had the pleasure to deliver on with Natural England in helping to educate audiences and understanding what the Countryside Code is. This Influence IQ is a proprietary tool that we have developed that allows us to ask bespoke questions when we open up direct communication with talent. These questions are often pre-agreed by ourselves and the brands that we partner with to allow us to understand a little more about the creator that might help inform a decision on whether or not a brand wants to partner with them. We score the talent depending on how successful they have been in answering these pre-agreed questions, and then the brand can give us the green lights to progress and move forward. This bespoke communication means that we can understand points about the influencers that may not already be publicly facing. And it's worth saying as well that we're very mindful not to be intrusive in asking questions that don't feel appropriate to ask. Ultimately, this service empowers creators and brands to work better in harmony, and it helps us to explain the nature of the campaign and equally allows the brand to learn more about their prospective creators. Now it's time to move on, and I can show you more about how we implemented influencers in working on an incredible campaign with Countryside Code from last spring into summer. I'll explain what the campaign was about. So we were asked to educate several growing and underrepresented targeted audiences And we would encourage them to engage with content on social media so they could become better informed on what the Countryside Code is and how they could consider spending more time in both green and blue spaces. Our human approach helped to over-deliver on all aspects of the campaign. We saw 47 extra Instagram story frames, which helped to deliver over 1.6 million impressions. And then we over-delivered across the click-through rate. So we were asking audiences to click through to learn more about the Countryside Code, and this was over-delivered by 306%. This was one of the first campaigns that we had worked together on, and it has really helped to shine a light on the importance of partnering with real people to tell real stories, which then the outcome is for audiences to be educated and entertained in ways of protecting our countryside. The next slide shows a list of how we made sure the campaign was balanced and fairly represented. So we partnered with 11 influencers in total, and the verticals included families, young people, people with disabilities, and the LGBTQ+ community. And within these verticals, we partnered with creators who were ethnically diverse, alongside other important factors to consider that could help bring the campaign to life in this balanced approach, such as owning a dog, so they could authentically talk about the responsibilities you should consider when walking your pet. Now, instead of me talking, the next slide will perfectly summarize the activity in around a 2-minute video, and you might recognize actually one of the creators who previously spoken on today's Pride in Nature too.
Well, it's an absolutely beautiful day, and we're out and about on the farm in the countryside and enjoying these beautiful green spaces.
As a family, we love getting out into the countryside and away from our screens. It's important that whilst we're out that we acknowledge the Countryside Code, which helps protect and respect nature.
When that happens, I grab my jacket and head to the great outdoors to connect with nature. Sometimes that's the coast or the woods, but often it's just my local park, and it feels so good. I love to stop, breathe in the fresh air and ground myself by listening to the sounds of nature.
We all love being outdoors, and with parks like this on our doorstep, we try to do it as much as possible. And when we're outdoors, we make sure we follow the Countryside Code.
What do we have to do with our rubbish though, when we're finished? Put it in the bin.
It's important.
Thanks, Johnny. So as you can see, we worked with a real vast amount of creators. And on the next slide, we had the privilege of partnering with Amanda Owen, who you may recognise, who featured on several TV programmes last year and has grown a huge audience online. Amanda was our celebrity influencer, and not only did she drive incredible content on social media, it helped to receive incredibly positive press coverage, which helped to further amplify the campaign with readers across the country. Now, as we reach the end of my slides, I would like to show you how I've had multiple opportunities in driving fair representation with brands of all kinds, in particular, working on strategies that can include LGBTQ+ creators across annual campaigns. Now, this image, you'll see my partner and I organised to meet up when we both were working for 2 competing banks during London Pride. Tom was looking after a Lloyds Banking Group activation, whilst I hosted 15 LGBTQ+ influencers leading the Pride Parade on a Barclays Bank decorated float. And this followed by a celebratory dinner and then a year-long production content series where we would organise each of the creators to meet other LGBTQ+ members of the bank, interviewing them to learn more about their experience and how they're supported in their corporate careers. And why I wanted to mention this, it's important that brands recognise the importance of Pride, but equally it's even more important that brands make every effort to partner with LGBTQ+ creators across the year and not just for 1 month of the year. Before 1994, LGBTQ+ people had never seen themselves represented in any kind of advertising. IKEA made history by launching the first ad with the two of the same-sex couple. And why is it important to discuss this? Well, I've been doing some research and I can see that 76% of respondents via Nielsen had said that they think brands can influence the evolution of LGBT rights. And 64% of consumers worldwide will buy or boycott a brand based on a stance on social issues. 71% of consumers surveyed by Forbes stated that they expect brands to promote diversity and inclusion in their online advertising, but more than half, which is 54%, don't feel fully represented in online ads. As we approach the end of my session, I wanted to conclude with the next and final slide. I mentioned that when I was younger, I didn't have access to social media like today, and it was almost impossible to have an online role model. And I now work in an industry where people trust people. LGBTQ+ creators across the country are building reassurance whilst driving education and new thought processes about our community. But despite the impactful movements, there are still audiences that like to express their own opinions to counteract this. At the start of this presentation, I talked about how you can accidentally influence people you know. And a personal story of mine is that my niece comfortably revealed that she is bisexual 3 years ago. And now she's in a same-sex relationship. And she told me that I am her role model. So this is proof that not every influencer is a social influencer. She became inspired by both my personal and professional journey from the earlier days of radio to now running this influencer marketing agency. And I truly never thought that I would ever be an influencer. So that for me perfectly summarizes why representation matters both online and offline. And I'm thrilled to see how Natural England is offering this Pride and Nature platform for our community to engage with each other. And of course, to offer advice on how to enjoy our outdoor spaces. I'm equally excited about our ongoing influencer partnerships, where we will continue to partner with a range of diverse creators to represent Natural England, sharing engaging stories that both entertain and influence audiences across the country in what I believe to be a more trustworthy way. Thank you so much for listening. You can find me on LinkedIn, where I'd be very happy to chat. Otherwise, back to you, Naomi, before we start the next comfort break.
Thank you, Joe. That was fascinating. I have learned a lot there, particularly a bit about what you said. I never thought I'd be an influencer. I want to think about that myself as time goes on, because I know that I never thought I'd be where I am in life and all the rest of it. And it's been amazing to hear your story. It's been fascinating to see the work you've been doing behind the scenes as well, you know, or rather giving us a behind the scenes look at what you do in terms of the Countryside Code. And as for the steel band, wow, I have got to find out more about that. So if you can put some links up for that, that would be absolutely amazing. Before we go to the break, though, which is what we're going to be doing next, the Q&A. I know that we've had a fair few questions come in because I have someone here with me actually just sorting out a pile of questions to ask. But while we've got the break, while you're not actively listening to someone or taking something in, let's have some more questions coming in, please. Just say who the question's for and ask your question, and we'll put it to them in the session. So, Joe, Lily, Nina, thank you so much And we'll head into the break now. And we have Ben Hunt after the break at 11:30. So we'll see you then. See you at past, everybody. Good morning and welcome back to the final session of the morning. We have got coming up next Ben Hunt, who's a journalist, leads on LGBT investigations with Vice News. Really looking forward to your talk, Ben. And that will be followed by me summing things up, and then James Diamond as the final speaker for the morning. So with no further ado, Ben, over to you.
Ben, you're currently on mute, by the way.
I wasn't before, but there we go. I am now. Hello, my name is Ben Hunt. Very excited to be with all of you today. I am, yes, Ben Hunt. I am a global correspondent with Vice currently. It is good to be here. You're currently joining me from New York, where I'm based, between London and New York. So it's 7:30 a.m. Excuse the bags under my eyes. I'm looking forward to some juicy questions later. I'm very looking forward to a Q&A, but for now, I'm basically going to preach at you for about 20 minutes. So I hope that's okay. The topic of representation is very important to me. I've got lots of things to say, as you'll find out in just a moment. But before all of that, I would like to play a very quick video showing some of my work. This is from my time as the LGBT correspondent at the BBC, and it's a story that I think sums up exactly why the kind of work I do actually matters. So we're going to play that now, please.
I'm really scared. It's been a long time since I did an HIV test.
You cannot reach them because they hide.
Senegal has one of the lowest levels of HIV in Africa. Just 0.4% of the population is HIV positive. However, for gay and bisexual Senegalese men, at least 27% are HIV positive. So, why are things so different for them?
Homosexuality can be punished with up to 5 years in prison here. This video of a mob hunting down a gay student went viral. I'm on my way to a sexual health clinic that specializes in treating gay and bisexual men.
I'm here to meet a gay man in his early 30s who's about to get his HIV result. Now, he has already had 2 tests and both of them have returned HIV positive results, but he doesn't want to believe they're true. Oh, that was a nice little sample there. Okay, cool. So if you want to see the rest of that, you can see on social media or just search like Ben Hunt Senegal and the video should come up. But yeah, that was for my time as a BBC's LGBT correspondent. And I became the BBC's LGBT correspondent, the first ever, in 2019. I was covering stories about gender and sexuality and identity. At the time, I was the BBC's youngest correspondent and also the only Black male correspondent, which was obviously on the topic of representation. It's quite important. Then I moved to being the BBC's West Africa correspondent. And in that role, I was told I was the first Black man ever to hold the title of Africa correspondent for the BBC. Now, the BBC has been around for 100 years, and there have been quite a few Africa correspondents. And Africa's been around a lot longer than that as well, actually. So it was quite surprising to take on that role. But I like it. I like being the first in things. I like kind of setting a path and being a bit of a trailblazer within the space. And it's really exciting. So I was very, really grateful to the BBC for taking a chance on me to perform both of those roles. And then I moved. So in September of 2021, I moved to Vice News. You probably heard a lot about Vice recently. It's going through it, as is every organization in journalism, but I'm still there. And I was focusing originally on LGBT rights within the UK and Europe. And then as of last year, I got promoted to global correspondent. And that meant that I just jump on planes and on buses and on trains and on boats and report on everything that's happening around the world, which means I'm busy. And as I said before, I'm based in New York and London at the same time. So I kind of do 3 weeks in both places. And currently I am in New York. I just arrived yesterday, so I am ruined. But it's a really exciting job. I absolutely love what I do. It's the best job in the world, and I really hope I can continue doing it for as long as possible. Last year, I won the Outdoor Foreign Press Award in France for my work investigating transphobia at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is an organisation looking at human rights within the UK. And since starting with Vice, I've uncovered lots of things to do with LGBT rights, all sorts of things that governments have done across the world, and it's been the absolute best time. I do see myself as a bit of a dark cloud over a very fabulous LGBTQ rainbow, because a lot of my reports are very dark and depressing, but at the same time, they shine a light on what's actually going on in the world, and hopefully that enables people to then do something about it, which is the best part of journalism. So love that today's topic is representation, because for me, that's why I do what I do, as I will get into just now. I have a very short attention span, so I like to do these as a bit of a frequently asked questions, like an FAQ. So I asked on Instagram what questions I should answer, and here they are. The first one is, tell us a bit about your story and your background. How did you get interested in journalism, and how did you break into the business as an LGBT person? So I completely fell into journalism. I always wanted to be a doctor. I had a full scholarship, and all expenses paid, full scholarship to study in Malaysia. And I went over there for 4 years. Now, I didn't Google Malaysia hard enough to realize it's illegal to be gay there. But I had a good time. I made it good. And when I was there, I started up a magazine and an events agency, and both did pretty well. And that got me into like the business world aside from medicine. So I left that and started working for Google as a strategy manager. And with that, I was working for media clients across the globe. And it was a fabulous role. It was great. One of my clients whilst I was there was the BBC, and that got me really interested in journalism. I thought I didn't have the experience, the contacts, the insight, the privilege to become a BBC journalist, let alone a foreign correspondent, even though that's what I wanted to do. So I started up a social media presence and a YouTube account. And that kind of blew up. I had around like 100,000 followers and like subscribers within a couple of years. And that enabled me to enter the LGBT influencer space and become a bit of an influencer. And that was kind of my segue into journalism. So I started, I left being like an influencer and joined the BBC, and I was expecting I was going to walk into the BBC and be like, hey, like, look at all the followers I've got, like so excited to be here. And I was going to be presenting like the news at 10 or the election coverage. But actually they said, if you want to work here, you can start at the bottom. And I was an intern for 6 months, no money, unpaid. I was making tea for free at the BBC for people that I was watching on TV. And it was a hustle, but I worked really hard and managed to go from intern to correspondent within 4 years. And I kind of achieved it with something my parents told me, which was be nice, but hustle hard. Be nice, but hustle hard. And the hustle has definitely been real. The next question is, tell us a bit about your coming out story. Is there anything you would go back and say to your younger self, and what would that be? So growing up, I genuinely thought I was the black gay man on this planet. Like, it didn't make sense to me that you could hold these various different identities at the same time, and it was an actual thing. I got my first bit of representation from a very educational place, a place called Big Brother. And there was a guy on it called Derek Lord, who was this ultra conservative, fox hunting, super well spoken, rich and wealthy black gay man. Now, me and Derek had absolutely nothing in common, apart from the fact that we were both black and gay. My family is very much working class. Didn't have money. Like, it's just a complete, I've never been fox hunting, different experiences. But for me, Derek was enough. Derek was a point of reference for me. It was my representation. Derek showed me that I could exist as a black gay man and actually do pretty well as a black gay man. So I would stay up late and I would watch that 24-hour Big Brother channel where they had like live streams, and they had birds tweeting in the background when the contestants swore and stuff, just to see how Derek walked and how he talked and how he acted. And I basically framed my personality and even like the way I speak around Derek, because that was my representation to show that I could exist and I could thrive and survive. And this is why I've been so vocal about my life and my experiences on social media, because it's important to show that I can exist, because I know that for a lot of people, they don't have the kind of attributes I've had and the blessings that I've had to be able to continue to live it as I do currently. So eventually I was actually outed in school, and I was bullied quite heavily in school. And I can't be mad because it set me on a pretty cool journey, but I came out thinking it would be rainbows and unicorns, and there'll be like a pride parade, there'll be like men in hot pants like outside my house, like, yay, welcoming me to the community. But actually the reality was I was just faced with silence and loneliness. Like, I came out and it was just sad. And this is something I see all the time in my reporting. This loneliness and being LGBTQ, it sadly seems to go hand in hand. A lot of people are very lonely. So if I could go back and tell myself something, it would be that the hustle is going to be hard, but ultimately the hustle is definitely going to be worth it. The next question is, what are attitudes like towards LGBT people in 2024, and how have they changed over time? So with this, it really depends who you ask. The best and the worst thing about my job is that people go through really terrible things and they think, I need to tell Ben about this. And for the past 5 years, I've worked specifically in LGBT rights. So I built up a bit of a name for myself within the space. So people will go through hate crimes, they'll go through domestic abuse, they'll go through being fired from their jobs because they think they're LGBT. They'll go through governments trying to kick them out of countries, and they'll contact me. And that means that my social media is just filled with trauma. Like, my DMs are just trauma filled, but it's incredible. And it's such a blessing to be able to take on this role where people actually feel they can trust me with these stories. But it means that I do get a real insight into how things are going on across the world. And let me tell you, things aren't looking too good right now. In the UK, a lot of people will tell you that there is a sliding back on trans rights. And I think that is quite evident, and I'll allow you to do your research into that. But it is very clear that things really have changed since I took on this role in 2018 and 2019. The game has completely changed for LGBT people in the UK and across the world. Closer to home, my parents are the only Black parents that I know who are entirely cool with their child being gay. I'll say that again. My parents are the only Black parents that I know who are totally cool with their child being LGBTQ. Not a single one of my Black friends in London has supportive parents. Not a single one. So, quick story. After Derek was voted off of Big Brother, boo, I then turned to the internet to find other representation. And I was very lucky indeed. I found 3 Black gay men across the UK who, like Derek and like myself, we had almost nothing in common apart from the fact we were all Black and gay, but it was enough. I wanted to be a doctor. One of them wanted to be a drag queen. One of them wanted to be a lawyer. One of them was an investment banker. All completely different people, but we came together, and like after college and after school, we would speak online on MSN. Remember that? And we would all talk about our experiences and like what we want for our futures and how excited we were about going to gay bars and like random things like that. I'm going to give you a quick trigger warning: suicide. I'm going to give you a quick trigger warning. Do a 5-second countdown there. So, as I said, I was in a group of, I had 3 Black gay friends. We were in a group of 4. Now, as of 2 years ago, I am the last one left in that group. The other 3 Black gay guys, very sadly, took their lives over the years. So they're all gone. I'm literally the last one left in that group. And it's at this point I talk about intersectionality. So this idea that you have multiple parts of your identity that intersect and can potentially hold you back. So for me, if I look at it, the only combining factor, the only common denominator within all of my friend group was the fact that we were all Black and gay. That was it, which tells me that if 3 of my Black and gay friends are no longer here, there must be something about the Black and gay experience in the UK that means they're no longer alive. It's that simple. And what could that be? Well, for one of them, it was family related. He moved back home during the COVID pandemic, and his mother wasn't happy with him being gay. She would pray outside of his door every day that he would be straight and all of this stuff, and it got too much. For another, it was workplace bullying. So he was working within a organization in Canary Wharf, and he was just facing some real bullying within the floor that he was working on. And nothing got done about it. Later on during the inquest, we found out that HR was supposed to be looking after him. It didn't really happen. Another one, it came down to religion. And all of this, like when I look at it, the fact remains that yes, the Black gay experience held them back. So in 2024, I'm really hoping that things are going to be better, but I'm not really seeing that. And I am seeing a shift in LGBT rights, and that makes me genuinely worried for how people are going to continue and what they're going to go through in the future. The next question is, what do you do to protect your mental health? Ha! So in 2019, I rescued a French bulldog puppy called Roxy, and she is my mental health mascot. She is my mental health champion. She barks at me and forces me to leave my house at least twice a day and to walk into nature, which is wonderful. And it's just amazing to be able to, for me, to be in London and to be able to go to like forests, like Epping Forest, like drive to Epping Forest and walk Roxy, and just to walk around and just be surrounded by nature. And I'm like, you know what? Life isn't that bad. I also run, or no, I drive or take the train, but I sprint to Brighton whenever things get too much. I was there at the weekend for my partner's birthday, and to be next to the sea and just, oh my gosh, breathing in the sea air and stuff, it's just incredible. It just fixes my mental health. So there's that, but also support networks. I know a lot of people on this call are gonna want to be allies. So you want to be there for the LGBT people in your lives, whether that's colleagues, whether that's family members. The biggest thing you can do is just be there and be a point of support. And I'm very lucky that I've had an incredible support network around me for the past few years, because it meant that I could do some really harrowing and scary journalism related to my own identity. Because for a lot of journalists, when you're working on like education stories or tech stories or I don't know, environment stories, yes, it affects you, but I'm literally reporting on my own identity on a daily basis. And usually of people going through, like I said at the beginning, very terrible things. So it's all relative to my own lived experience, and that's triggering. So having a support network is really great. And a therapist, 10 out of 10 recommend. The next question is, how does your identity impact how you approach your work? And from your perspective, what can people do to be more mindful of intersectionality? So like I said, intersectionality, the idea that you have various parts of your identity that can intersect and potentially hold you back. Intersectionality for me is so real, as I said about my Black gay friends, but also when I was working in corporate and I was working for Google, I was part of a group called the Gayglers. And the Gayglers was a group for gay Googlers internationally, like LGBT Googlers. And I was also part of the Black Googlers Network, which was a group for Black and ethnic minority Googlers internationally. Now, I always found I was too Black for the Gayglers and too gay for the Black Googlers Network. I always felt somewhere between the two. And to explain that further, the Gayglers were a group of incredible gay men, majority of whom were white, and they were pushing for things like parental leave for gay couples and pushing for us to have pride floats to celebrate gay marriage in Ireland and all of these different things. And that's great. But at the time, I'd literally just flown over from Malaysia, where I couldn't even openly speak about my sexuality because it's illegal and there's technically like a death penalty for it. So to suddenly be in this workplace where people were wearing rainbow lanyards and like screaming about being gay, I was like, what? Like, it's too much. But at the same time, the Black Googlers Network, I was working in this network with individuals who were coming straight from the African continent. They were working in places like Ghana, in places like Nigeria, in places like Uganda. And in these places, they didn't know any gay people. So suddenly there was I in their room with them, talking about like work and stuff. And they were like, how is this gay man just openly talking about his life on social media at the same time as then talking to me in this network? And for a lot of people, it was a real struggle and they couldn't really get their heads around it. So I say, like, it's at the same time as organizations telling their workers to bring your entire selves to work. For me, it was really difficult too, because I was in a space where I didn't feel like I could literally be myself at work because people didn't really understand my experience. And that's not saying that every organization needs to have a Black gay men's society, although how amazing would that be? But it's just being mindful that some people genuinely cannot bring their full selves to work, no matter how many HR projects exist that look like they're ticking boxes and stuff. Some people just won't be able to do that. So how do I approach my work in terms of my identity? I make sure that I'm staying true to myself in every organization. And if I don't feel like I can, I leave. And that's my biggest recommendation to anyone that reaches out to me saying that they're going through blah in their workplace. For me, no job and no money is worth my mental health. and you will see me stacking shelves in Tesco before I work for a newsroom that doesn't appreciate me, or working as a journalist in a place where I feel like I cannot be myself. Like, I'm completely over that time of my life, and I now need to know that I'm safe and secure where I am. The next question, I think we're going to do a couple more, is tell us about being one of the UK's most visible gay journalists. Do you feel a responsibility or a pressure being in this position? Yes. Yes, I do. I got into journalism to expose injustice, and I wanted to do that globally. My family is from Guyana, which is the only country in the Americas where it's still illegal to be gay. And that's meant that I've got this huge juxtaposition in my life where, as I said, like, people that look like me and act like me do not have supportive families. But my family is so supportive, even though they are fresh from Guyana. And it's an incredible position to be in, because it means that anytime I can go back to the Caribbean, I'm almost pushed back into a closet. But then the minute I leave there, I'm this big rainbow of like LGBT stories and accomplishments and all of this stuff. It's a real like double life. But that means that for me, I do have this huge responsibility and this pressure on me to be a voice for the voiceless, to literally be a voice for people that in my home nation do not have a voice because they cannot speak out for fear of being attacked or being killed. So I want my work to make impact, and I want there to be some kind of a lasting legacy from the things that I do. And that's genuinely why I'm still a journalist. So whether that is exposing the fact that LGBT suicides are not currently being recorded, whether that's exposing funding that's been cut for LGBT anti-bullying projects, whether that is exposing transphobia within certain organizations, all of the things that I do, I'm proud that they've at least started conversations. And if there's one thing that I love doing, is starting some sort of a conversation about LGBTQ rights. But at the same time, there is a real pressure. And this is me aligning with some of your experiences where people tell me that they feel that the LGBTQ community is too militant, but they're scared to get involved. They're scared to be an ally because they don't want to make mistakes. But for me, when I started at the BBC as the LGBT correspondent, I really had to force myself to understand people's experiences. And I would encourage all of you to do the same. I had to push to understand, what does it mean to be a non-binary person? What does it mean to be trans? What does it mean to use the right pronouns? Everyone goes through this stage of learning, and it's just about doing the work. Especially if you're working with young people now, because as I'll explain in a moment, I work with a lot of young people and they expect that you've done the work. And if you haven't, then it's not going to give you the time of day. So it's kind of on you to make sure that your spaces are welcoming. When you're bringing in interns who are like 18, 19, 20 years old, they're going to expect certain things to be in place, and they're going to expect you to understand certain things about the LGBTQ experience. And if you don't, then there's going to be trouble, or they're just going to leave. So it's about doing the work as early as possible. There are so many incredible resources for understanding what people are going through. And even if you hold controversial views on like LGBT people, whatever else, there are laws in place to protect people's rights. And it's just about making places understanding and accessible for individuals. The final question I'm going to do before shutting up is, what are you doing to promote good representation in your industry, and what can we do? Very early on, when I became a journalist, I found out that there was no pipeline of like young Black male talent behind me. It was kind of me and a few others that had done incredible work before I got into the space. And that made me really sad. So I started up an organization which is just going through the Charity Commission process right now, which is called Find Your Voice. And it is a confidence academy for young people. So when I was younger, I felt I didn't really have the confidence I needed to succeed. And now I travel around the UK once a week when I'm in the UK, and I go to schools and I give young people the tools that they need to be more confident. And I use journalism. It's like a confidence masterclass wrapped in like a shady journalism package. And it's 1 hour masterclasses for 6 to 9 year olds, 10 to 12 year olds, and 13 to 18 year olds. And within that space, we've had some incredible work. We've had some young people that didn't think they could go to university have then gone on to go to university. And it's really great to just give people a kick up the backside and be like, you are in control of your life. And because of that, I have seen better representation within my industry of people realizing that they can also be journalists and that they have a voice, which is just so, so great. And I've specifically focused that organization on the most impoverished places within the UK. So I'm really going around coastal Britain and urban city areas. And if you are in a place where it feels like you may have some kind of funding, I'm always happy to receive extra money for that work. So please do reach out across social media or via email, have a message on LinkedIn, whatever. But in terms of what you can do, don't catfish people with diversity. If you're working in a place and you're thinking that we are not diverse enough, we don't have LGBT people here, we don't have Black people here, whatever else, don't catfish people with that lack of diversity. Don't tell them that you're working in a great place and they're going to love it there. Be honest. If you've got work to do within your space, then reach out to consultants, reach out to me. Like, we can have a chat about how things can improve for where you're working and what things you can put in place. But I hear so many stories from people who are the first within a team. So they're the first within their investment bank to be a Black young graduate. They're the first non-binary person within their accountancy firm. They're the first I don't know, gay farmer to be taken on for X amount of different projects. And it's always, well, not always, but it can be a really triggering experience for people to be that first when things aren't in place for them to actually be welcomed and accepted. So make sure that things are in place for them, and otherwise you're going to lose them. The amount of stories I get from people who have walked into opportunities and a month later has been like, am I wrong for wanting to leave this because it feels like I can't actually be myself here? No. So yeah, that's my biggest advice. And also bring people in, bring people on the journey with you, open your doors to college students, to people that come from the same backgrounds as you do, and increase representation in your own industry. With that being said, I think I'm done preaching. So please do reach out on social media if I can be of any help at all. I'd love to continue this conversation in the question and answer session as well. And thank you so much.
Ben, thank you so much. That was fascinating, genuinely fascinating, hearing sort of challenges you've had to meet.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure we'll have a load more questions for you in the Q&A. I have someone, Tim Cox, my friend, sitting here to my left, and he is sorting questions for me to answer when we go to the panel in just a moment, and I'm sure there's going to be some for you in there.
Thank you.
So, thank you for that. Sarah, would you like to bring in some more? Yes, we have folks appearing on screen now. Absolutely great. If I can have the first question, please. You start piling them over. And the first one is actually for Ben Andrews. Ben, I think it's brilliant that you're out in the farming world. And the question is commenting just how homogeneous that world is. They'd like to know, how have you managed to find other LGBT farmers? You mentioned groundswell. Do you find that people are more likely to be out and accepting in regenerative farming?
Yeah, great question. I think that the best thing for sort of meeting other people, not just because we're organic and the way we farm probably isn't the same as our neighbours. So social media has actually been a fantastic way for me to meet other LGBTQ+ farmers, but also other farmers who farm like me. It's such an incredible way to network with other people across the world, and it's amazing that social media has its pitfalls, but for someone who lives in quite a rural place, that link with anybody instantly across the world is absolutely incredible, and something that sort of really would have enjoyed to have had years ago. But in terms of the are LGBT farmers more likely to be regenerative? I think that the people sort of like going between the Oxford Farming Conference and the Real Farming Conference, I'd say there's definitely more like queer representation in the Real Farming Conference.
Take myself off mute again. I'm trying not to make any noise in the background. And the second question's also for you, Ben. You said you hadn't faced much overt homophobia in farming, but what about casual homophobia? You said you sometimes drop your sexuality in conversation. Are there situations where you wouldn't feel safe doing that?
No, I think that there's always an assumption, isn't there? You know, a lot of people, especially in my industry, would assume that you're straight. And so yesterday I went and bought a caravan for for like the seasonal workers, big upgrade on the big static caravan, and it was sat down chatting with a guy, and he was like, "Oh, so you married? You got kids?" And I was like, "No." And we were talking, and he said, "Oh, what did why did your wife leave you or whatever?" And I said, "Well, actually, I was married to a man." And he was like, didn't even flinch. No, like, he's like, "Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry for assuming." And I find that is usually the response I get, is that people are like, "Oh, I'm sorry that yeah, I didn't mean to assume." And I don't want to make them feel awkward, but it's just nice to remind people not to make those assumptions. But yeah, that's the extent that I've had to my face. Who knows what people are saying behind my back? But yeah, it doesn't bother me if they're saying it behind my back. It means they've got nothing better to think about. So.
And it also means that they probably daren't take your face, but that's another matter. Thank you for that. Lily, the third question's for you. How can we make city nature reserves less like islands and more joined up? And what can the LGBT plus community do to help wildlife spill over?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a lot of projects, some of them by the London Wildlife Trust, but also by some other charities and other organisations that are devoted to joining up a lot of the city nature that exists. There's a project, I've forgotten the name of it, but it's connecting two disparate, I'm very bad at giving concise answers, so I'm going to do my best. There's an area called the Great North Wood, which is in South London, which was once a big sprawling wood and is now lots of little areas. And so there's been a series of projects that have been funded by the National Lottery and other places to connect those up. So I think supporting projects like that and supporting community groups that are working with nature as well are some really good ways.
And speaking of discovering nature, next question is also for you, and it's, what barriers do you think were in place that stopped you from self-discovering trees? Not dismissing at all the value of the planned events that you attended, but what stopped you from discovering for yourself?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a few things. I think especially being at the intersection of multiple marginalizations, and sometimes it's hard to pick out like which marginalization is people are responding to when they're being oppressive. What I would do is direct you to the Wild in the City website. There's a page about the Nature Connectors program that has loads of information about the barriers that impact people of colour in nature and why that program was set up. So yeah, I think that's a really good one to have a look at.
On mute, Naomi.
That's me. Following on from that, how can we make natural spaces more accessible to people who don't have transport or the financial resources, for that matter, that they would need to undertake outdoor activities?
Was this one for me as well, Naomi?
Go for it.
Oh, great. So I don't drive. I can't drive. I do live in London, which has very good public transport links, and at the same time also fatigued and can't always access them. So yeah, it can be really challenging. I think one of the things that's really helpful for me being in London is that it is a really green city. So sometimes it's going to my local woods rather than, going to a forest the other side of London for me. Yeah, and finding nature in lots of different spaces. When I was on the This Is Our Place nature residency, we were looking at experiencing nature from your house and like looking out the window and seeing what you can see and things like that, and not just thinking about nature as going off on a big epic trip that lasts all day, things like that.
Thank you. I have to say that as someone who doesn't drive, I actually find it sometimes fairly difficult to access not so much nature, but nature that I don't see every day, because you can get sick of walking the same route after you've walked the same route every week for a year or something like that. But that's another story altogether, but it's certainly something that's worth a fair bit of thought, I think. Moving on, I've got some questions for Nina. Has the animal kingdom understanding of sexuality moved beyond our own?
Has the animal kingdom understanding of sexuality moved beyond
Our own?
As in our understanding of sexuality, or what sexuality is? Because
I'm reading the question verbatim.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think even the way it's framed implies that like nature's moving faster than we were. Nature was always like as impossibly diverse as it could be in terms of sexuality. Like I'm sure that when you look back at the history of life, something that I studied a really long time ago, so don't quote me on anything, that the first reproduction would not have been sexual, right? It wouldn't have been male and female. We haven't had the binary of sexuality that we are told is normal in human society, which obviously is not normal, but like was never normal in the natural world anyway. Yeah, so I think, of course, it's beyond it. We are so far behind it, I think, in terms of our society and our discussions of it. And I'm so excited that it suddenly seems to be that it is a popular conversation to be had. I hope it isn't a fad, and that we're still talking about queer nature and seeing all these amazing events like the ones I saw last year in London, held in these big institutions. I hope it wasn't just a fad of 2023, and because there is so much still to learn. I mean, in some ways we're slowing down in terms of our science and our discoveries because so many have been made at this point in time, but I think this is something that has been hindered not because we haven't seen evidence of it, but because we weren't ready to understand what that evidence meant. So
Thank you. Someone's commented that watching you tear up made them sit and cry for a bit. Having made the general public realise that homosexuality is natural is obviously very important to you, and I think it is for most of us. What do you hope for the future? How closely do you think societal acceptance of LGBT+ people is linked to self-acceptance? And the person also says, thank you for your amazing talk.
Book recommendations. So talk, you said at the end, or book there? I might have misheard you.
Thank you for your amazing talk. Was
oh,
the
I thought
comment
you said book, and I was like, I did not write either of those books that I held up, but you can thank me for the recommendations. Please read them. Yeah, so the question itself there, can you just repeat, because there was an awful lot there. I'm sorry I made you cry, whoever that was.
What do you hope for the future, and how closely do you think societal acceptance of LGBTQ+ people is linked to self-acceptance?
Yeah, for the future, I think I would really like to see queerness taught with nature. So, you know, I mentioned in my talk that I studied zoology. Before that, I was reading all the books that I could about nature and wildlife. I studied when I was a nature guide. I specifically studied South African wildlife. I have taken all the information I possibly could about like that was available to me about nature, and yet it took me a very long time to understand just how queer it is. And that's not because it isn't, it's because I wasn't taught it and that information wasn't available. And so I think, you know, sometimes I think about the first few lessons I ever had about animals and how they classified sort of, this is what a fish is, and a fish lays eggs and it has scales. And it didn't take me long to start fish keeping and keeping aquarium fish, which is a great hobby if you're a queer ecologist, by the way, because fish are so like beyond the binary. To be like, well, these fish aren't laying eggs. These were they were guppies, and they were, you know, mating like crazy and popping out tiny babies. And then I very quickly met my transgender fish. Like I had a Siamese fighting fish, and when I had females alone together, one of them would start transitioning into male behavior. And I couldn't keep a group of females. I couldn't then reintroduce a male into that group because they would fight, which is something that Siamese fighting fish males are known to do. And I was like, well, that fish has changed sex. And that was me at 10 or 11 seeing that and understanding that that was what had happened. And yet, like, that wasn't reflected in my education, in the books I was reading. And as I say, it sort of feeds into this idea that queerness is unnatural, which obviously I don't agree with. The second question there was, does it feed into your own self-acceptance? I think what everyone has said today shows that it does. You know, I wish that who I was and how I expressed myself does not come purely from, it only comes from myself and who I am, but it doesn't. It comes from my experiences and how I've been received and how I've been treated. An example of this is the fact that I do usually go by she, her pronouns when I'm Nina. Those are the ones you'll see in my email signature. They are not the ones I chose to put in today. They are not the ones that I have on my performer profile or when I'm sending show information before I perform in queer shows, which is she and they, which are both valid for me. Because I don't want to have a conversation with people about pronouns and what they mean in she, they every single time I say them. And that is very much not everyone's experience, but me myself, I find that tiring, and I don't want to have that conversation every time I meet someone new and I say my pronouns. I would rather say my pronouns, and she and her are absolutely valid for me, though maybe not all the time. But I would rather sometimes like have that slight misaddress than have to explain to everyone what that means. And if I lived in a world where everyone understood what non-binary is and how that should operate, then I would express myself that way all the time, but I don't, and that's why.
Thank you. A lot to think about in that answer. Got a couple of questions for you next, Jo. Fairly long one, first of all. The question has commented that it's fantastic to be listening to these amazing talks. Really inspiring and interesting, and truly appreciate you sharing with us, which I think is for everyone. Now, we at Natural England have a series of priority places where we're trying to work with others to take forward nature recovery. How do we connect authentically with LGBTQ+ people around these places? And also, are there specific ways of being a positive and natural ally when working with nature? So a two-parter, how do we connect authentically with LGBT, etc. people around these places? And how specifically, are there specific ways of being a positive and natural ally when working with nature?
How to connect for me, lean on modern day technology. Social media is a platform to connect with others that are experts at discussing and sharing all kinds of different themes. Long gone are the days where social media is only you connect with friends. I think Facebook still exists, and that's probably what that's for, but other platforms very much aren't for that reason. You connect with people who you probably will never meet, but you follow them because you enjoy the content that they create. And there are so many more platforms as well that often people don't consider when looking or searching for the right people to collaborate with. You have your OGs, as I would refer to them, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, and now everybody knows what TikTok is since the lockdown days, because it seemed everyone migrated from Instagram to TikTok simultaneously over one night. Outside of that, Reddit, for instance, it's a hugely popular platform that often isn't considered firsthand, but some incredibly validating subjects being discussed daily. That often gives you an opportunity to meet and work with someone that you maybe have never considered if you hadn't explored that platform. And sorry, Naomi, could you repeat the second question now?
Yes, are there specific ways of being a positive and natural ally when working with nature?
I mean, personally, for me, I think it's not to overthink it. And it seems like it's been a bit of a reoccurring theme across all speakers on this. There are, of course, some quite complicated and complex themes around how to support. However, I personally believe if you break it down, to be an ally and to enjoy nature truly is, first of all, lead on what benefits you as a person. There's all kinds of advice on what you can do to enjoy nature. Advice that maybe is on offering ways of protecting nature, but to enjoy it, I mean, you know you better than anybody. And so whilst we do everything we can to protect it, I'd encourage you to explore and do new things to find new ways of enjoying it.
Okie dokie, thank you. Follow-up question for you. What are your top tips for non-influencers wanting to influence more LGBT plus representation in nature?
This is a question I'm asked daily, having my own influencer agency. And although I don't specialize in ways of growing audience, I have had opportunities of working with people that do, and so I can share some of their tips. I think the most important is defining your objective. When you create a platform, or if you're looking at ways of being able to build an audience to converse with in different ways, really understanding what your core objective is most important, because having seen it several times myself, it's so easy to come off track and start creating things that maybe aren't so centered around what you started speaking about in day one, and therefore why an audience started following you. Though that said, it's not a bad thing that sometimes you veer off, because ultimately you'll start building new audiences by introducing new subjects too. It's just a way that you do it, to bear in mind that you have an old audience to possibly keep engaged. And the second comes in place is knowing your audience is key. Audiences, whether they're younger or more mature, digest things online very differently. So for instance, short form versus longer form content, they do different things, and I'd encourage you to do them all to be able to encourage different types of audiences to converse with you. Third thing is platforms. Like I said earlier, understand where your audiences are and try and navigate those platforms to engage those audiences. And the fourth point is to create content. You can't really gain audiences online without having content these days. And there's different ways of doing it, whether it's more raw formats, filming via a mobile phone, that's fine. Or whether it's more polished content using a full production team, that's fine too. It depends on what your audience prefer. And in ways of growing audiences, I truly believe one of the most natural ways on social media in particular is collaborating with existing content creators. There's so many different ways of doing that. You don't have to meet someone in person. I mean, look at this event. We're doing it virtually, where hundreds of people have been watching us throughout this morning. There are ways of collaborating with established people online that have built audiences that could share audiences with you, providing that you have an authentic story to share that could plug into their interests.
Yes, I think the whole of this morning for me has been a masterclass, but I think that you're answering those questions in particular. The one platform I would add to your list, though, is Mastodon, which is one I use. I find it's absolutely amazing. It's very queer friendly. And there's an awful lot of good people on there and an awful lot of absolutely fascinating content. But moving on from me waffling, a question that's for everyone: how can we give confidence to single and older LGBT plus people who tend to be less confident to be out, to become more engaged and represented in the natural environment? And what do we think the barriers are to achieving that? Over to all of you. Someone say something?
I would like I wonder if anyone could self-nominate, feeling that they may be the oldest person to talk about it, because I really think that's why representation matters. If you have young people talking about how older people should be represented, then it kind of defeats the point of what we're saying. Yeah.
Is that me? Am I the oldest?
41.
42.
Is that old enough?
I think there's one of the most incredible events I went to locally was, so I don't know if anybody knows the little town Hay-on-Wye, where they have a big book festival every year. They had a they run a Pride event, and if anybody wants to like have the most warm feeling of just like community and an acceptance, is going along to Hay Pride, where you've got it's this tiny little market town in mid Wales, and there are about 1,500 people turned up, and I met people all ages there. All people on the LGBT Q plus spectrum. I got chatting to this family. It's a husband and wife and their kid, and he was 12 and had come out to them, and they were like worried about how he was going to like grow up in a rural community, and so brought him along to. They were talking, well, we'll have to move to Bristol, and brought him along to this event. And he, like, I was just watching him running around with all the other kids there, just obviously living like absolute best life, and seeing the older people there represented. So being able to see all these younger people just doing their thing. And I was chatting to this one girl, and she said, "Oh, you know, we're doing it so that the younger generation can feel themselves." I was like, "Well, it's not about, like, you think you're just influencing the younger generation, but you're also showing the older people that it is okay to be yourselves." And it sort of works both ways up the ladder, but trying to find local, I think there are little local LGBT groups all over the country, and it really is handy. Just search the internet, and there's something that will pop up.
I think there's also something to acknowledge about, I'm very conscious at this age in my life that there's a bit of a missing generation of LGBTQ people, particularly for gay men, because of what happened with the AIDS crisis in the 80s. There's not a lot of role modeling at an older generational level, because we just simply aren't in as many numbers as we would have been had it not been for the AIDS crisis. So I think there's something for us to begin role modeling for each other, as much as Ben said, for younger people. But it's about recognizing and including that at different ages and stages. Certainly my experience as a gay man is sometimes the gay bit is right at the front of my experience, and sometimes it's something I'm forgetting about. So at the moment, as a parent, I sort of forget that I'm a gay parent, and most of my thinking is around how do I do parenting better. But it shifts and it moves, and I just think it's going to be like lots of things in the LGBT community, which is we're a community and we need to look out for and with each other and support each other.
Thank you. I saw a message pop up on my screen just now. wondering whether I might like perhaps to answer this question as well. I suspect that that is due to the fact that I've got white hair and a walking stick, because I am indeed one of the older people. Now, how would I be more engaged, represented in the natural environment? Well, I'm very much engaged in it from the solid earth upwards. As I mentioned, I'm a geologist, so for me, I tend to look at the solid earth, how it's influencing what grows on it, and how that in turn is then influencing the fauna, etc., and the landscapes. But how to be more represented? That one I think is fairly difficult for me. Yes, I see a fair few people of my own age group, 60 something, when I'm out and about. On my coat, I have from the Civil Service LGBT plus network. You know, I've got one of those ribbons, rainbow ribbons. But next to that, I have the RSPB Starling badge, which is the rainbow badge. And I don't think it leaves much doubt that I'm somewhere within this community. And I have no problem with that. But I mentioned earlier, I was out for a walk one day. These two chaps were walking their dog, and I'm a dog person, so I stopped to say hello, and dog said hello to me. And we just stood and nattered for about 15 minutes. And at the end of the conversation, one of them actually said, "Well, thank you for stopping to speak to us." I thought, I don't need thanking. You're human beings, you're interesting people. You've got a lovely dog that I'm very happy to make a fuss of for as long as it will let me. So engaging with other people, yes. Represented. Oh, I know there's a Gay Birders Club. I don't know what the age profile is, but I suspect it's leans more heavily towards the silver end than the vibrancy of youth. And I don't really know for myself what the barriers to achieving that would be, but it's certainly something I shall think about. And I might even pop up a blog post somewhere interesting about it at some point. But moving on, Sean, I have a question for you. Before I throw it open more widely, who are the role models that you look for in representation?
Who are the role models I look for or that I look to?
Both. Who do you look at for representation? So, who do you look to?
Historically, it's always been Harvey Milk, somebody that stood up and was loud and proud from a really early age. Was one of the first elected gay politicians in the US, and one of the most wonderful moments of my life was when my husband and I were able to go to the old Castro camera shop where he set out his stall. You can't see it here, but there's a tattoo that runs down my arm that says hope, and he was very famous for his hope speech, and I referred to it on my wedding day. And he was an inclusive and encouraging leader, but he was also passionate, proud, and would fight for the community. So we operate and exist in a space where pride is a protest. That's something that's said very often, is that there are rights and freedoms that are not universal around the entire world. And they're not universal in all aspects of all, even British society. So it's important that we are compassionate and advocate and curious and listen to people and help them understand. I've always been happy to be inspired by leaders who seek to understand. But sometimes it's really important to set a boundary and say, no, this is not okay, or this is what must happen. And we must be able to remember that, you know, we're talking about human rights. So it's important to be able to stand up for that. So it's that, for me, it's looking for people that can do the compassionate strength aspect. Or you're on mute again, Naomi.
There's a surprise again. Thank you very much indeed for that. I'm very aware that time is moving on, but a question for everybody. I think if we could have some just fairly concise answers to this, what's the best piece of advice you could give to an ally who wants to support representation? Sean, shall we start with you again for that one?
Be curious, I suppose, in a friendly manner, not in a sort of accusatory manner, but just ask questions and find out. Most people I've ever spoken to from the LGBT community are far rather you ask questions and listen to the response than make assumptions, because it's so different for all of us.
I think that's a very good reply. Someone else jump in.
I can oh, sorry, you, Lily, go first.
I have a very concise answer, which is support groups run by the people you want to support.
I like that. Nina.
My answer is around learning yourself, reading and learning things. I think, you know, I do a lot of work with EDI within my organization, and many of the things that in the environment sector, discrimination is highly intersectional. So a lot of the stuff that we're learning about and trying to be more inclusive of is of groups that I don't belong to. And I have always found it hardest to advocate for queer inclusivity rather than things that I am not part of, because as you can see, it is so emotional. It refers to your own trauma, it refers to your own struggles. It is so much harder to advocate for yourself. And if you as a colleague know why pronouns are important, and you have a colleague who is, say, non-binary, and you hear them being referred to by the wrong pronouns, you know, we all make mistakes. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, but I think we should normalize being able to gently say, no, it's they, actually, you know, or just and do that, so that you can do it in a space where, like, if you're talking about that person and that person isn't there, making that normal to have that conversation without them, so they don't need to be there being the one telling you actually that was wrong, and putting that responsibility on them, and being able to advocate for that. If you hear the word unnatural, being like, well, that's really silly for all those reasons I heard in that talk Nina gave, you know, like advocating for queerness despite not being queer because you know so much about it, you know, without centering yourself massively, but you know, that can be so helpful to be informed.
Thank you. Question I think it would be really good to do everyone answer this, but in quick fire fashion. Who is the most influential member of the LGBT community to you? Mine is Alan Turing, said the questioner. The name, please, into one sentence. Answer. Ben Andrews.
For me, I think it was the director Francis Lee who directed the film God's Own Country. It was the first time I think I had seen myself represented properly on screen and TV, where I could truly identify with the characters. And he's the film Ammonite that he did about Mary Anning. Again, I thought was a fantastic representation that hadn't really been done before.
Thank you. Ben Hunt.
Hello. For me, it'll probably be Armistead Morpin, who I fabulously interviewed last week in Scotland, in Edinburgh.
Oh, wow.
He's written some incredible books. I'd recommend all of you to have a read or a watch. They've also been made into a Channel 4 series and a Netflix series, Tales of the City. He's been platforming LGBT talent, trans talent since the 1970s, having difficult conversations with editors, with broadcasters, with publishers to get queer stories told. So 10 out of 10, recommend.
Thank you. Joe?
I will continue the theme of music and say Freddie Mercury for me, because not only iconic on stage in the form of costume, but revolutionized music. And I don't believe we would have some of the artists that we would have today without what Freddie Mercury had done.
I think you're right there, but I'm now going to have Seven Seas of Rhye going through my head for the rest of the day. One of the formative songs from when I was a teenager. Lily.
I'm going to resist the invitation to name an individual and continue my theme of community and say everyone who's started a community group or sustains one.
Good answer. Nina.
Oh, that was really hard on the spot question, by the way. I thought about it, and I want to talk back about cabaret because that has inspired me so much as a queer person. You heard me mention very briefly in my talk a drag king. A lot of people don't know what they are, so they are what you would imagine if you know what a drag queen is. It's somebody who is impersonating masculinity, often in a very funny way. And it is thought sometimes that it's a very new concept. It's not. So I'm going to shout out historic male impersonators from, I think, maybe the Victorian era. So there's Gladys Bentley and Vesta Tilley. I really recommend you look them up for some fascinating queer history. And because I'm here and I've been talking about queer art and performance, I'm going to shout out some drag kings that you can go and see today if you're based in London, or look up and see your local drag scene. But we have a heartbreaker of drag kings called Bojangles in London, who I don't think I've ever dated a sapphic woman in London who doesn't have a crush on that drag king. And I've shout out again to Bi Curious George, who intersects between queer ecology and performance, and their show, which I so recommend you go and look up, called Queer Planet. It's going to be touring the UK this year. So those are mine.
Go on.
I'm going to say Russell T Davies for two reasons. One, Queer as Folk was something that absolutely blew the doors off for me. That was the very first time I'd seen myself on screen. And he then went and rewrote Doctor Who, and Doctor Who was the closeted version of how to be a gay man when you were an alien from a different planet doing different things. So the fact that he's combined those things and has advocated so hard and so consistently for LGBTQ rights in all of his writing, that he's just been an absolute icon.
Thank you. Trying to think who I would nominate, and I'm finding it difficult just to think of one person. Someone who does immediately come to mind is Christine Burns, who founded Press for Change, and who has an OBE for her work, but so many other people as well. I did for Pride Month last year on my Facebook page for my family and friends and colleagues, and that is very definitely a Venn diagram that is not separate circles. It very much overlaps. But I found so many inspirational people, most influential people, scientists, musicians, artists, mathematicians. I'm going to make the dreadful joke that I really want to meet a non-binary mathematician at some point, simply because I've got to say it at some point in my life, and today is going to be the day. But there's so many influential people, but if I had to pick one, probably Christine Burns. She's one of the names I grew up with in the community. And we're running fairly short of time, so one final question out to the whole community. Has anyone experienced the idea that it is safe to be queer as long as I'm good at my job, or as I'm palatable for cis het people? How can we approach the issue of conditional acceptance? It's a really difficult final question, I think.
I can have a go. I'm stealing this from the feminist movement, but it has a similarity, which is you have to do it backwards and in heels. So I find that it's not so much that I'm only accepted as a gay person if I nail it, but I do feel that pressure of, you're a gay person, we all need you to nail it. So you can't just do it well, you have to do it fantastically well. And as a gay parent, there's a double pressure because there's a lot of societal judgment of gay parents, unfortunately. So there's that element of, maybe it's an internalized pressure rather than an externalized pressure, but I definitely recognize, you're carrying the weight of other people's expectations around with you. So please don't, in the words of RuPaul, piss up for us all. But I've not had it, I've not felt it from employers or from the organizations I've worked with, just that pressure to do it.
Okie dokes. Ben Hunt, would you like to add to that as well?
Yeah, sure. I think it's definitely something that I've been trying to work on within myself over the past few years. We know the pressure of being the first within a space, but also holding multiple identities and trying to be as authentic as possible for each one of those communities that you supposedly represent. It's hard. For this, I'd like to give a shout out to the people that are running the employee networks within a number of different organizations, especially the LGBTQ ones, because they're going through hard times at the moment with budgets being slashed left, right, and center within EDI. So for these individuals that are actually turning up every day to work and not only doing a day job, but also a gay job, it's incredible that people find the time, the resilience, the understanding to be so visible within some workplaces that ultimately do not accept LGBTQ people, especially in certain nations where they continue to fly the flag even though they really shouldn't. So yeah, I think it's tough. It's really tough. I know a number of trans people who are really struggling within workplaces at the moment because they're incredible at their job, but culturally the places just aren't supportive of them. And they're staying because they have families to support and people to feed, but they're not having a good time. And I think in certain circumstances at the moment, you're seeing that just being good at your job isn't enough. And actually you want to feel secure, you want to feel stable, you want to feel appreciated by your employer. So yeah, it's a difficult time, I think, especially because people are being very open with their feelings about LGBTQ people right now. I've never experienced anything like it. Like I can walk into an office and give a talk like this. I give a lot of different corporate talks on diversity and pride, and I will have questions from people who hold transphobic views or homophobic views because of religion. And I'm like, how did we get to this point where people are so comfortable with bigotry? So like, what is going on? So yeah, in these times, anyone that is flying a flag and being open and brave about their journey, kudos for me.
Thank you. I think we're running fairly much out of time now. So I'm going to say thank you all for answering those questions. In the cheat sheet, it says time to sum up at this point. Now, I just wish that I'd got some sort of tool in front of me where I could create a word cloud, perhaps, because there's so many words that I wrote down this morning: deep, inspiring, thought-provoking. My life in sea creatures. What a career. I never thought I'd be an influencer. Gumleaf skeletonizer. All sorts of things like that. There's going to be so much I'm going to be thinking of after this for quite a while. You want to be judged on what you do, not who you are. Bonobo sex. Just all sorts of things. It's been interesting here as well. Everyone talking about, well, using social media, things like that. I'm certainly going to be looking at it a little bit more widely than I do, I think. But at this point, I am going to hand over to James Diamond, who's People Director, Senior Champion and an ally of Pride at Natural England. And he's good people. James, over to you.
Thank you, Naomi. And wow, what a morning we've had together. And it really has caused me to reflect on why representation matters. And in particular, I reflect back actually to the first Pride in Nature, which was in 2021, when remarkably, 30% of the speakers were straight allies, and all of them were white. Now, we knew we had it wrong at that point. They were great speakers, but we knew we had it wrong. And then I reflect on today, over almost 1,000 people have engaged with Pride in Nature since then at our events. And I don't think Natural England has ever pulled together a panel which includes an organic farmer, a cabaret artist, and an investigative journalist speaking from New York. And I think I might have even heard a nightingale singing at one point. So it's an extraordinary panel we've pulled together of speakers. Thank you, speakers. It's been a real privilege to have you join us today. It really reinforces for me that the challenge that Natural England and the whole natural environment sector has to recover nature and to bring the benefits of that nature recovery to all people will benefit and has to have different perspectives, different ideas, and that diversity of thought that we've talked about this morning, that diversity of perspective, diversity of background. That's what will allow us to solve the challenge of nature recovery in this country. So that's why representation matters. It matters for all sorts of reasons, but it really matters if we're ever going to recover nature in this country. You know, the vision and the mission of Natural England as the host today. So thank you again to all our speakers and sharing your amazing stories and honesty. Thank you to the amazing group of staff from Natural England that have organised today. You know who you are, but Sarah, Michelle, Nick and Tim, who was sort of press ganged at the last minute to help with the Q&A. A huge thank you to Naomi for being an absolutely wonderful host today. And many of you won't know that sort of halfway through today, Naomi had to hop from a laptop to a phone, but did it seamlessly. So thank you, Naomi. You've been absolutely wonderful. We'll look forward to seeing you all in 2025. We'll do this again, I'm sure. Not quite sure how, but we'll do it again. I'm just clocking. I left out a staff member, Johnny. Thank you. I knew I'd do that. We'll see you in 2025. Do let us know how today was. You can use the QR code that's on the screen to use Mentimeter. Let us know about today, what's worked, what we could do even better. I think we're already thinking that representation might mean an older person as well as part of the panel as we clock during the Q&A. But I'll finish with one more thank you to everybody and wish you to have a great day. And do let us know how today has been. And we'll look forward to seeing you in 2025. Thank you.